He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Monday, March 10th, 2025, the 50th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. We are back from GART in Las Vegas. To those of you who were there, it was wonderful to see you all. Those are always a good time. We now have done 7 of them, so we're seeing many of the same faces over and over again, people who have become part of that broader Badlands community. That's always very nice. Thank you always for the kind words and for the gifts. What a great weekend. A little exhausted, but we're going to be just fine. Plenty going on to talk about. And we've got 4.5 days, 5 days to cover. I don't think we're going to cover all of those 5 days, but I think we'll get ourselves mostly there. So welcome to another week in the Golden Age. We are leading up to what seems like it might be an inflection point toward the end of the week with a potential government shutdown and the confluence of a few other events at that time. So I suppose we will see how that goes. Today, we're going to talk about the blame game that seems to be seeded. The seeding process is happening so that when there is that inflection point, people will blame it on Donald Trump, the negative aspects. And then, of course, the only solution will be a return to the regime and its policies. We talked a bit about the hijacking of the Great Reset narrative over the weekend at GART on the panels I was part of. And I want to just quickly recap that idea. We have the Great Reset plan, the agenda on one side, the agenda of the World Economic Forum. Klaus Schwab wrote COVID-19, the Great Reset. We know themes about you will own nothing and you'll be happy. We have the UN 2030 agenda, globalism broadly, the needs and interests of the transnational corporations, the emergence of this technocracy potentially coming up toward the singularity. Elon Musk said we were on the event horizon of the singularity just a couple of weeks ago. And I think that this week is going to be a big one in that direction. And so in advance of that, we are seeing Donald Trump blamed for what they suspect is going to happen and some of the financial setbacks as they're being described in the media in the lead up to that. The goal, of course, when you have a plan like that or a series of plans among different factions, all headed in that direction, attempting to lead us into that age in their own way, making that look like the solution to everything. Donald Trump is grabbing onto that, turning it in a different direction, hijacking the Great Reset narrative. And through the formation of beliefs around that, we would then be able to redirect that Great Reset towards something that is not so dystopian, something that does not constitute the end of human liberty for centuries or millennia to come. And so there's a significant meltdown, of course, that goes along with that. People are sensing that something's coming. And I want to start today with just a perfect illustration of contemporary liberalism in microcosm. Check this out. This is how the leftists are reacting to Elon Musk. They are hacking Teslas and Tesla dealerships as well. Some guy just running alongside a Cybertruck, trying to smash through the windows of the Cybertruck. Those things are like armored vehicles, basically. That's insanity. There was another post, I think highlighted by Elon Musk, of some liberal talking about how he wanted to chase down the driver of a Tesla Cybertruck and kick his ass, throw rocks through the windows of the Cybertruck. The media still has its effect on some of these people out there, and it is quite sad, but until that fever fully breaks, this is where we are going to be. And in line with the ongoing attacks against Teslas and Cybertrucks and Tesla dealerships by the indivisible activist community, among others, we have this today. Doge designer on X, formerly Twitter. First, protests against Doge, then Tesla stores were attacked. Now X is down. I wouldn't rule out the possibility that this downtime is the result of an attack on X, formerly Twitter. Elon responded, there was, parentheses, still is, a massive cyber attack against X. We get attacked every day, but this was done with a lot of resources. Either a large coordinated group and or a country is involved. Tracing. So potentially a nation state level attack against X, formerly Twitter, to block it worldwide. There are people in various chats that I'm part of today talking about how X is down in parts of Europe as well. And it's been back on and off a few times at this point. This is Newsweek covering it earlier this morning, or perhaps this afternoon, I guess. Dark Storm team claims DDoS attack on X causing major outage. And because everybody is obsessed with X, formerly Twitter, this is a major story, and they're doing live updates. X is experiencing its third major outage of the day, with users reporting widespread login and loading issues. The hacking group Dark Storm Team has reportedly claimed responsibility for a DDoS attack on the platform, according to a public Telegram post. Newsweek has reached out to X via email. Apparently they have not responded, but Elon, of course, has been responding on his own. Partial recovery. Elon says that the hack is an attempt to silence him. Thousands of reports. It's still down. And this right here is where we started. So X is under attack. The most important news site in the entire world, we are told, by the man who operates that site. And, you know, of course, not something that you could actually glean from reality unless you were still entirely addicted to the central narrative. Once you actually are off X, then it becomes very apparent that it is just the same stories cycled through over and over and over again, most of them info ops. And there is some intelligent chatter on there occasionally, but ultimately it is the intellectual kids table, and there are more reports recently of censorship on X. Raheem Kassam from the National Pulse, one of Steve Bannon's guys on War Room, was locked out of his account last week, being forced to delete a post because he used a no-no word. And so that's still very present. They have all sorts of ops being run, even the pro-Nazi ops. But you can still, if you are effectively a dissident at various times about various issues, you can still be locked out of your Twitter. There's some talk this week about the singularity. Steve Bannon had a guy named Mark Jeftovich on War Room this morning talking about how he believes the singularity has already happened. And this is something that I've been talking about for a long time. I did again over the weekend. The bad thing that we believe is coming from AI has already happened. Our reality is dictated in many ways by the machine, and we build on behalf of the machine. Burning Bright and I are covering the movie Transcendence from back in 2014 tomorrow night on Badlands Story Hour, and so we're going to talk about that extensively. But this is from Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin this morning, and he refers to a philosophy called the Dark Enlightenment, and so that is the neo-reaction, the movement that is primarily credited to Curtis Yarvin, who I largely don't agree with, at least in terms of how I see the world and how I see a new world emerging, and to the philosopher Nick Land, who I largely do agree with. And I think personally that he thinks too much of Curtis Yarvin, but that's just me. We'll see how the future actually does unfold. So Dugin wrote an article called, hold on, well, that was going to pop up from Twitter, so we don't have that right now. That's impossible. But the article that he's commenting on in this Telegram post, and I wish I could share Telegram on this platform, but that's not possible. So I'm just going to have to read it to you. The article he's commenting on is called A Still Deeper State and the Dark Enlightenment. And in summation, the hypothesis, a deeper state, Silicon Valley tech oligarchs and right-wing accelerationists backed Trump to advance their own agenda, something we've been talking about pretty extensively, led by figures like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk promoting dark enlightenment ideology. Again, I would separate the two of them. It seems like Elon Musk is doing something else. Elon Musk, in my estimation, is kind of a Judas goat, leading these tech libertarians, these neo-Kabbalists, into their own doom ultimately, or at least the doom of their agenda for the world, if not for them themselves. And I'm patient in observing that. It could be that Elon Musk is properly associated with these people. We'll find out eventually that he's actually not properly aligned with MAGA, and then in one way or another, that'll have to be cleaved and moved on from. But for now, in my mind at least, these people are separate, but Dugin writes about them together, and he may well prove right. It prioritizes technological acceleration, AI, space exploration, crypto, over liberal humanism, viewing woke policies as obstacles to progress. Again, many people in the MAGA movement see woke policies as a problem, and of course, I think maybe we all do, but they're not the primary problem. And it's entirely possible to oppose woke ideology without actually being ideologically aligned with MAGA or having anything more than aligned interests for some period of time. And neocons can have aligned interests with MAGA for some period of time. Liberals can have aligned interests with MAGA for some period of time. That's what the MAHA contingent is largely about. Many of those people do not align with Donald Trump on much of the rest, but they saw Robert F. Kennedy Jr. align his interests, at least ostensibly, with Donald Trump. And so they said, okay, well, I'm at least that much MAGA as long as MAGA is still MAHA. So it's entirely possible for people with a wide range of ideologies that by and large conflict with our interests to still be aligned with Trump and the agenda for some period of time and on those particular interests. And the technological accelerationism right now is that. Is Trump drafting onto that movement, or because that movement was largely at the forefront of the Great Reset agenda? Or is that movement drafting on Trump, who has taken the lead? And for a reminder about drafting, I actually have now put that clip in here. So let's just take 40 seconds.
This is something Harry and I work on together. It's called drafting. One car tucks in behind another. Two cars can go faster than one. They divide the air resistance between them. Now here's where it gets interesting. The lead car has to floor it to hit 200 miles an hour, but the car that's tucked in behind doesn't. can go just as fast and still have power in the reserve. So when these two cars come off that last turn, the car that's in back can move out of the draft and slingshot past the lead car, beat it to the finish line. And you go straight to victory lane.
Ah, Tom Cruise, what a stud. And by the way, I'm not sure if you have noticed, but the StreamYard scene format is still not fixed. Okay, so is Trump drafting on the tech acceleration, these tech libertarians at the forefront of the Great Reset agenda, moving us into this new technocratic age, or is it the other way around? The important thing is that we understand the distinction. We can understand when other ideologies are aligned with ours while we pursue common interests. But we must also keep those separate so that we don't accidentally end up pursuing their interests instead, thinking that all of them are the same. And that has been a major, major problem. It might be the major problem for the MAGA movement over the last 5 years that I've been a part of. I think it's incredible, having left an ideological movement and mindset myself to come to this one. It's interesting to see all the people that didn't have to leave anything behind to come to this one. Most of those people just believe that they've been right all along, and they are so desperate about being in a minority that was held powerless and out of the conversation for so long that they believe themselves to be in desperate need of allies and will then incorporate whatever allies they can find and describe in any way. And it's usually the television just handing them these allies. They'll believe those people are legitimate friends and then preach unity, trust, faith in those people when they actually deserve none. Something that is far easier to observe from the outside, in my view. Let's continue with Dugan. He argues that traditional institutions, the Dark Enlightenment argues that traditional institutions like monarchy and closed society better enable technological leaps. And that is Yarvin's argument. He might be right about that. I'm not sure. The monarchy he describes is not exactly like just one monarch controlling everything. It's just a very top-down society, but these societies will kind of self-select and be much smaller and more enclosed, and the government will be viewed more as an offerer of services. And so you would live in a place under a government whose services you desire. If you want to live in a certain kind of society, well, someone will inevitably just be there to build that sort of society. And Yarvin actually prefers, and maybe I should say accepts, the possibility that some of those disparate societies will prefer something like communism when he is not, as he describes it, a communist, although his grandfather was a communist who he believes helped defeat the Nazis. Sure. He's accepting of all the various ideologies, whatever might spring up in these disparate societies, because the realization would be that they don't actually have to impact the other societies. I'm not totally convinced that that isn't profoundly ignorant. Yarvin is also, I believe, it seems to me from his writing and from the way he describes himself, an atheist and perhaps a nihilist, but at the very minimum, a scientific materialist who believes in the normie understanding of history, though he has memorized absolutely all of it and absolutely all of the counter-narrative history as well. He's a very intelligent guy and a very smart, entertaining, and convincing writer. I just happen not to agree with him. So the blueprint for 2025, as Dugan describes it, he says blueprint for conservative revolution staffed by teal-linked figures. And he points out specifically Russell Vaught, who is the director of the Office of Management and Budget under Trump and was in the first term as well. And Vaught seems to be very technically adept at finding the ways to dismantle the deep administrative bureaucratic state which is something we're all on board with. But again, the techno-libertarians are all on board with it too, because they don't want the centralized federal government controlling everything. They want to take all of that down and fragment it and privatize it. And so we're going to talk about some of that today as well. Dugan says Trump's success hinges on an alliance between populist conservatives, the trad right, and tech oligarchs, the tech right. And he is creating a new global power axis to redefine the global order. The Trump revolution is not just political, but metaphysical too, aiming to a tech-driven societal transformation. And so that is where I would leave the Dugan opinion on that behind. I don't actually think that Trump is a representative of that. I think that he understands that separation. He is on one side of it. And the emergence of the tech power, as we see it right now, was going to be totally unavoidable. And that's why I talk about the idea of drafting and hijacking the Great Reset agenda. That's not something that can just be taken out of the picture. This is decades, if not centuries, if not millennia, in the making. And so it has to be dealt with and redirected. That is my theory of the case. It also turns out that and again, part of my theory of the case is I believe that all of these stories as we see them now would be happening in much the same way without Trump to translate and redirect these stories if Trump was out of the picture. And they tried to get Trump out of the picture, and it's possible that they thought they had Trump out of the picture at many times. I would suggest that the techno-libertarians and globalists were both in support of the neocon candidates that we saw run during the fake primary elections, Ron DeSantis in particular, but Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, those types. And then J.D. Vance, of course, as well, who is in that Yarvin Teal ideological grouping. And, of course, he was brought up into public life and prominence by Peter Thiel himself. Of course, the flip side of the Peter Thiel aspect is the Mark Andreessen aspect. He's essentially the same thing on more of the tech uniparty left, sponsoring a website like Barry Weiss's Free Press. And of course, there are other ideological alignments that these people have. Now, in response to the, I just mentioned J.D. Vance, actually. Let's go about it that way. Over the last few days, I think many people have seen the emergence of these spectacular J.D. Vance memes, and people have gotten quite upset about them. People who are in love with J.D. Vance and cannot deal with, I guess they're just extremely triggered by these memes, but it was written up in the Daily Mail over the weekend to give you some idea of how big this trend in memes was. Look at that. J.D. Vance reacts to hilarious memes of his distorted face plastered all over social media. So J.D. Vance said he was okay with these. There's one of the memes. These are rather silly examples. There are much better ones. There's the Bob Ross, please and thank you. A lot of the meme was based on J.D. Vance's conflict with Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office a couple weeks back, angry that Volodymyr Zelensky, the comedic actor from Ukraine, had not said thank you even once. So there's J.D. Vance as Fallout Goy, I guess. J.D. Vance as whatever that thing is. That one's hilarious. Is this Home Improvement? I don't know. Another great one. I'm sorry to those people listening to the audio. You're just not going to get it. There is J.D. Vance as the Sphere in Las Vegas. That was amazing. I actually saw that thing over the weekend. It is, I was not inside it, just from the outside, but very, very strange. There he is. What is this? A minion? Purple face. Okay, so let's see I'm just going to go through these. Oh, it's Kevin James, not the home improvement. What was that guy's name? The assistant. Tim Allen's assistant in home improvement. Someone in the chat's going to say it. And I'm going to, I want to say it's Bob. I don't know it's Bob. Let's have a look at some of these other ones. There is JD right there. These just SpongeBob SquareVance. Vances with Wolves. A Norman Rockwell JD Vance on both sides. Here we are. Collecting JD Vance Cabbage Patch. Are those Magic the Gathering playing cards? Miami Vance. JD Vance is Michael Jackson on the cover of the Thriller album. JD Vance from Dumb and Dumber. So you're telling me there's a Vance? JD Vance as Matthew McConaughey from True Detective. JD Vance walking the podium out of the Capitol on J6. JD Vance, POV, he didn't say thank you once. And this was, oh yeah, here we are. Vance Halen, Vance the Night Away. You might as well Trump. One of my very intelligent and hilarious friends said this was my favorite of the weekend. JD Vance as Sun Tzu. The Art of Please is the book. In war, the only thing that matters is your ally saying thank you once. And Vladimir Zelensky famously did not even say thank you once. That bastard. Here is another one of the greatest, but this is a movie. So it needs its own special moment. Where is this movie? Here we are. JD Vance patrolling Washington, D.C. for the next bureaucrat that refuses to say thank you to the American taxpayer. Wow. And JD Vance finally responded by posting a picture of one of the memes of himself, the one that I guess he thought made him look cool. And you can judge that for yourself. But I would suggest that this is the sort of meme trend that has taken the possibility of J.D. Vance being the successor as president to just about zero. And I think that maybe the people who were just insanely triggered by all of this over the weekend perhaps realized that you kind of don't come back from this. He's not a serious character, and people have realized that he's not a particularly serious character. And I can't say I'm sad about that. We do not need to grovel about who the next president is going to be in nearly 4 years still. And people are already worried, oh, J.D. Vance has to be the next president. No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. He's not our best chance to win. Doesn't matter. We don't even have real elections. And many people still don't care about real elections. It's funny, actually. I wasn't going to bring this up today, but might as well. It's quick. This morning, Elon Musk posted this on X, formerly Twitter. He responded to a post from Gunther Eagleman, who said, if we don't fix elections while we have the House, Senate, and presidency, we deserve to lose. Elon Musk responded 1,000%. So he agrees. But here's the thing. Elections need to be fixed at a state level. And people are still swayed by the illusion of red states. They do not understand that our elections are fake. They have ignored widespread efforts by the uniparty right to support the legitimacy of our 2024 elections. No one is claiming that elections were stolen, except for Donald Trump. Somehow people have taken on the notion that admitting our elections are fake would somehow discredit Donald Trump's clear and overwhelming mandate from the people or make him not president, like he's just going to vanish. Joe Biden remained in his position as fake president for 4 years because people weren't even willing to call Joe Biden a fake president, despite it being obvious that he never received 81 million real lawful American votes. And yet somehow people think that calling into question the integrity of our 2024 elections is going to mean that Donald Trump doesn't get to be president anymore. It's crazy. He has an overwhelming mandate from the people. That's the only thing that matters. And Donald Trump did say,
sports has always been something that Americans rally around to come together. They really do. You won the popular vote. You won all the swing states. But still, Kamala Harris got 75 million votes in the country.
Well, if you believe the whole thing.
Yeah, okay. Let's just say
it is ridiculous.
That the election was as it was.
Excuse me. There are 7 swing states. I won them all.
You did
by a lot.
But let me just get to the dismount here.
And I won the popular
Have
vote.
you thought about how to try to...
if you believe the whole thing is ridiculous. In that same interview, he also called J.D. Vance the non-successor. So I don't know what you want me to say. But yes, our elections, considering that the idea that we need to preserve some sort of unity or grovel before certain characters, and the leverage point on that is a fake election to be held. Let's do the math quickly. What do we have? 44 months from now? 44 months from now. And we need to grovel for a character based on a fake election to come at some point. It is insane. And those memes were absolutely hilarious. Donald Trump had a couple interesting appearances over the weekend. On Friday, he held a crypto summit meeting at the White House. And let me find, where is my wonderful clip? There it is.
Gianni Infantino is my friend for a long time, and during my first term, we worked out a deal to get the World Cup, and then because of lots of interesting things that happened, I ended up being president. When it showed up, I was always disappointed. I wasn't going to make it. I was going to serve 8 straight, and said we did it the hard way, but maybe the more important way.
Man, isn't that crazy? He got the World Cup and he got the Olympics in the United States. And then he thought the whole time that he was going to do 8 years. He wouldn't end up then being the president when the Olympics and the World Cup and America's 250th birthday happened. And something happened, and it just turned out that he wasn't president for the last 4 years, quote unquote, and now gets to be president for all of those major events. How did it happen? Well, one way it definitely didn't happen was as the result of real, legitimate elections. But thank goodness we voted hard and committed ourselves to the regime's system. And it has to be mentioned. We talked about that on this podcast for just about a year in advance of that election, that the votes weren't going to be real. The elections weren't going to be real. Nothing was done to make our elections more legitimate. Nothing. And the only possibility, because they were never going to be able to sell a narrative about how Joe Biden, or Kamala, as it turned out, was able to win a fake election after a fake campaign, after fake primaries. The earliest debate of all time. Remember that when Trump debated Biden? They were going to take him out for old age. Trump showed him off to the whole nation. They debated before either of them was even officially the candidate. Have to get Joe out there because they needed to get rid of him. Replace him with Kamala, at least in the story. They were never going to be able to sell that to anyone. So the best option for the regime in that scenario was to loudly and proudly announce that Donald Trump won the election on election night so that no one would look at the elections, no one would think about them. Doesn't matter how ridiculous and impossible the results were in North Carolina or Arizona or anywhere else. Doesn't matter that Trump has an overwhelming majority and won all over the country. He talks about it now. He won something like 2,700 counties compared to 500 counties. But yet we have a razor thin margin in the House and the Senate. The whole thing, as Trump says, is ridiculous. The best they could do was tell the country a story about how Trump won and hope that everybody just fell back to sleep. They would fill up the down ballot races in the House and the Senate and in state governments and local governments with uniparty candidates, tools of the machine, and everyone would just simply forget about our elections. I talked about how we would be getting the hose again if we were going to go out there and vote hard and not admit that our elections were fake and demand they be fixed. And that is exactly what we will be getting. It is impossible to have predicted that exact scenario if our elections were real. So let us continue on. Donald Trump yesterday was on Sunday mornings with Maria Bartiromo on Fox News or Fox Business. I can't remember exactly, but let's start here.
America is back. Momentum is back. Our pride and spirit are back, and we're just getting started.
Right.
What do you specifically want America to look like in 4 years when you're done?
Well, I want a dynamic country where the private enterprise carries the day, not the government. And I want a strong country militarily. We need that nowadays. You can see that probably better than ever before. So I rebuilt our military. A lot of it was given away to Afghanistan, but it was a lot, but a very small portion, in all fairness. But when you think about the billions and billions of dollars that was just handed over, but I rebuilt it. We're going to be rebuilding it again because we need that. We always need that. But we're doing a series of incentives, tax incentives and other things. The tax bill, I think, is going to be very important. The Democrats will fight us all the way. One thing I learned the other night, again, I could say, because it's my fifth such speech. And at the beginning, I said, I didn't know it was going to be as pertinent as it turned out to be, that no matter what I do, this group of people in front of us, I could come up with the cure to the worst disease that the world has ever seen. I gave other examples. I said, no matter what I do, they're going to sit there angry, insolent. You just see it. I mean, you see it. You can feel it. No matter what I say, no matter what I do, no matter who it is, they won't stand, they won't applaud, they won't clap. They'll just sit there with sour faces. And that's what they did. And, you know, it was interesting. I said, I wonder if I should put this in, but it worked out to be true. And I think by putting it in, I showed that it was true. And it's sad because we're doing great things in this country. This country's really got a chance to be pretty quickly great again. I think the country has got a big light over it right now, and I've been told this by even other foreign leaders. We had Modi, we had everybody. We had from France to India to about 12 that want to come in. They all want to be here. Every one of them wants to be here. We had the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom who was here, and he couldn't believe. He said the difference in terms of the feeling about the United States is very different. It feels that we're back, we're respected again. We are respected again. And in a way, we're back, and it's only been a few weeks.
So we're back. He talks about the goals for the next 4 years. And he also mentions that moment from the speech before the joint session of the Congress last Tuesday, when he preemptively called out what the Democrats would be doing throughout the speech. They would be ignoring him. They would be mocking and ridiculing him, at least attempting to do that. They would be heckling and attempting to disrupt the speech. And ultimately, they would show themselves to be as anti-American as can be. All of the Trump actions from the first 50 days that the American people, by and large, consider major wins for Donald Trump were being reconstrued as major losses by the Democrat Party. They're unable to give him credit. And it's just funny how he says that. I don't know what's wrong with them. Maybe they weren't allowed to do it. Let's move forward here. So CNN today had this as their top story. Cracks are forming in America's economy. Trump is a big reason why. So any potential economic disruptions, we're already dealing with some of that with the markets this week. Same thing with last week. And all of that is going to be blamed on Donald Trump. We talked about that last week. They were attempting to blame economic decline on the tariffs. And then after they went hook, line, and sinker around that narrative, Donald Trump announced, the tariffs are they're actually going to be paused until April 2nd. I would do it April 1st, but that's April Fool's Day. So we're going to do it April 2nd. Maria Bartiromo asked him about that yesterday.
The economy for a moment, because there are rising worries about a slowdown. You've got the Atlanta Federal Reserve saying we're going to have a contraction in the first quarter. Look, I know that you inherited a mess, and you said that the other
I've only
night,
been here.
but are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America. That's a big thing. And there are always periods of, it takes a little time. It takes a little time.
Can you give us a sense of whether or not we are going to get clarity for the business community?
Well, I think so. But, the tariffs could go up as time goes by, and they may go up. And, I don't know if it's predictability. I think
that's not clarity.
No, I think that they say that. It sounds good to say. But for years, the big globalists have been ripping off the United States. They've been taking money away from the United States. And all we're doing is getting some of it back. And we're going to treat our country fairly. I wanted to help the American car makers until April 2nd. April 2nd, it becomes all reciprocal. What they charge us, we charge them. It's a big deal. But what they charge us, we charge them. But this is short term, and I felt that for the good of the American car makers and the MCA, the USMCA, it's Mexico, Canada. I thought it would be a fair thing to do. And so I gave them a little bit of a break.
All right. So right there, you have the subject matter of that's what's being used to place the blame on Donald Trump, to tie any of this economic downturn as they're describing it. This is not a big deal. These things are expected. The markets are the markets. Donald Trump and the MAGA base, the people who were most affected by what happened in 2020 are not the same people who are being affected right now by this. Now, we can talk about this stuff in relation to concepts around drainage. I think that's what's happening. We talked about that last week with the Panama Canal and BlackRock potentially as a drainage vehicle. We will see how all of that goes. The idea described by Trump and in various venues and by Scott Bessent, as we'll see in a little bit, is to re-privatize the American economy. Bessent talks about it with the banks and deregulation, but it's true of corporations as well. At some level, there is a punishment required for transnational corporations who have helped to implement the global regime agenda here in the United States of America against the interests of the American people. So I think that is partly part of the explanation, I should say, as to what's happening right now in the markets and beyond. Talk about the tariffs. The tariffs were the big cause of all that last week. And then he said that he didn't like to make predictions about recessions or not. So the big headlines today are about how Donald Trump refused to rule out that we would be in a recession. And that is what's causing the markets to tank. CNN starts out their article, cracks are forming in America's economy. Trump is a big reason why. America's nearly 5-year economic boom is starting to show its age. 5-year economic boom. Did you feel the economic boom of the last 5 years? What part of the economy experienced an economic boom for the last 5 years? That's preposterous. Joe Biden, the fake president, Joe Biden, oversaw an economic boom for the last 5 years. Was 2020 an economic boom? What it was a transfer of wealth to billionaires and oligarchs and major transnational corporations that pushed towards centralization and monopolization of markets and industries. And to the extent that those stocks, particularly tech stocks, drive the standing of the markets overall, they did well, and which means, people believe their 401ks are doing well, et cetera. But that couldn't possibly last on those ill-begotten gains. The article from CNN, cracks are forming in the economy's foundation. Layoffs are mounting, hiring is slowing, consumer confidence is eroding, and inflation is picking up speed. Although all of those things would almost certainly be happening if former Vice President Kamala had won the election. The uncertainty that President Donald Trump's economic policy has unleashed is exacerbating those problems. So it is, last week it was the tariffs. Maria Bartiromo was concerned about the uncertainty because it was the tariffs, and then it was the taking off of tariffs that were causing the economic problems. So the tariffs caused them. Taking the tariffs away, you would think, if the tariffs caused them, taking the tariffs away would stop causing them. But no, that caused them more. And then it was just Trump refusing to dismiss the idea of recession that was actually to blame. Stocks slump after Trump declines to rule out recession. That's today in ABC News. Pretty incredible, isn't it? All of these things can explain this economic issue. Tariffs, not tariffs, Donald Trump refusing to rule out recession. And you might remember that during the fake and illegitimate Biden administration, those 4 years, that pause that Donald Trump often talks about. The definition of recession, much like the definition of vaccination, was changed. It used to be 2 consecutive quarters of economic decline, or maybe it was even the slowing of growth at that point. But that was no longer the definition. It didn't matter how many consecutive quarters they had. It was an economic boom, we are told. An economic boom. Let us get to, we're going to come back to some of that. But let's go to Donald Trump and the creation of a strategic reserve for cryptocurrencies. This is Trump on Thursday in the Oval Office.
Signing, this is very historic, an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve and digital asset stockpile. This is a promise that you made throughout the campaign, and today we're keeping that promise. The reserve will be capitalized with Bitcoin that the federal government already owns, so it won't cost taxpayers a dime. This is like a digital Fort Knox for digital gold. And premature sales of Bitcoin over the past years cost American taxpayers over $17 billion in lost value because we didn't have a long-term strategy.
Right.
Now we do. So.
And this is something you believe in?
100%, yeah.
Okay.
And the whole community believes in it.
Very good. And I made the promise, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
How about that signature? That is really some signature. My signature is garbage. I don't think my signature has ever matched from one to the next. I don't plan on making one that does match either. So a strategic Bitcoin reserve and a crypto asset stockpile, he separates Bitcoin from other cryptocurrencies. Wonder what that means. I know, XRP people. You're totally probably right. The same way that the HD DVD player was going to outcompete Blu-ray. Oh, look at this article about how much better the technology is. By the way, I'm not suggesting that the technology is not better in certain ways. It's about whether or not it is the winner. It seems not to be, but we don't need to get into that part of the conversation. That is a very sensitive topic these days. So from that cryptocurrency meeting, here is, if I can just pull this up, hold for processing. Donald Trump.
We'll also explore new pathways to accumulate additional Bitcoin holdings for the reserve, provided it's done at no cost to the taxpayers. We don't want any cost to the taxpayers. In addition, my order directs federal agencies to conduct an inventory of all crypto assets currently held by the U.S. government and determine how they can be transferred easily to the Treasury. Non-Bitcoin digital assets will be held in a new U.S. digital asset stockpile where they will be managed properly. My administration also is working to end the federal bureaucracy's war on crypto, which was really going on pretty wildly during Biden until the election came about. About 5 months before the election, he became a big fan because he heard how many people were in favor of it and how many people love it and respect it. But I guess it didn't work out too well for him. People understood what was going on and paved the way for groundbreaking innovations in institutional finance. Under the Bitcoin administration, regulators strong-armed banks. I mean, they really did. They strong-armed banks into closing the accounts of crypto businesses and entrepreneurs, effectively blocking some money transfers to and from exchanges, and they weaponized government against the entire industry. But I know that feeling also. Maybe better than you do. All of that will soon be over, and we are ending Operation Chokepoint 2.0. Now, some people really suffered. It was ridiculous what they were doing, but.
So ending Operation Chokepoint 2.0, bringing in the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve and the digital asset stockpile. What is Operation Chokepoint 2.0? Well, this is Wikipedia. Operation Chokepoint was an initiative of the United States Department of Justice beginning in 2013, which investigated banks in the United States and the business they did with firearm dealers, payday lenders, and other companies that, while operating legally, were said to be at high risk for fraud and money laundering. This operation, disclosed in an August 2013 Wall Street Journal story, was officially ended in August of 2017, and the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, settled multiple lawsuits by promising to Congress additional training for its examiners and to cease issuing informal and unwritten suggestions to banks. These are some categories, merchant categories, that the FDIC listed as being associated with high-risk activity: fireworks sales, government grants, home-based charities, lifetime guarantees, lifetime memberships, lottery sales, dating services, credit repair services, coin dealers, ATM operators, racist materials. I didn't know that was such a big market. I thought it was a kind of open market online, but that everyone just sold those for free. Pornography, quite a market for that, I'm told. Online gambling, tobacco sales, travel clubs, etc. That's a wide variety of businesses. To simply have them labeled as primary targets for fraud and other financial schemes. Very bold. And you can imagine how the targeting of so many businesses who may operate, in addition, in the crypto space, would be a detriment not only to legal businesses, but to cryptocurrencies. We're told the big problem is that they're vehicles of fraud, as if somehow prior to cryptocurrencies, the world didn't have enough vehicles for fraud. Our entire world is run by an international criminal enterprise. Fraud and money laundering are two of their greatest skills. Operation Chokepoint 2.0, this is perplexity, refers to a coordinated effort by the Biden administration's financial regulators to restrict banking services for cryptocurrency and digital asset companies. This initiative is seen as a continuation of the original Operation Chokepoint. Key aspects include regulatory pressure, debanking, deposit limits, stigmatization, and regulatory scrutiny. Critics argue that Operation Chokepoint 2.0 violates constitutional protections, including due process and the non-delegation doctrine. The initiative has been controversial, with some lawmakers and industry participants claiming it unfairly targets the digital asset ecosystem and stifles innovation. So Donald Trump is calling that a wrap. This is Paul Grewal with a thread on X, formerly Twitter, seen here at threadreaderapp.com. He says they haven't gotten the message. Despite a huge week for crypto across the rest of the federal government, on this late Friday night over at FDIC Gov, staff still continue to resist basic transparency into Operation Chokepoint 2.0. A few stark examples. One of our requests concerns FDIC's representation in a hearing before the court that the agency had conducted due diligence to ensure that no documents were destroyed. We asked FDIC to describe what example that due diligence was, but FDIC has repeatedly refused to do so, and now takes umbrage at the request to explain the basis of its assertion to the court. In response to our requests for FDIC guidance or policies on processing FOIA requests directly relevant to our policy or practice claims, the agency has produced only snippets from a few documents that have little to nothing to do with the specific FOIA policies or practices that History Associates has challenged in its amended complaint. What exactly are they hiding? And then there are other redactions. 53 pages are redacted in their entirety, and many other pages contain heavy redactions, rendering the documents unintelligible. When we ask for an explanation for the majority of these pages, we are told absolutely nothing. So Coinbase, by the way, is deeply involved with this issue as well. Coinbase is one of the primary, if not the primary, digital asset exchanges. It's kind of potentially, in my view, maybe a central bank for cryptocurrencies. Potentially, I suppose, Michael Saylor's company, formerly MicroStrategy, now just Strategy, may be as well. Interestingly, a man running for Florida governor against what is suspected to be the wife of Ron DeSantis, Casey DeSantis. That man's name is Byron Donalds. He is recommending a Bitcoin reserve for the state of Florida.
2.7 is the price. President Trump has a plan for a strategic crypto reserve. Now, Congressman Byron Donalds wants to do exactly the same thing for the state of Florida. He's here now, gubernatorial candidate, Congressman Byron Donalds. What do you think a crypto reserve would do for the state of Florida?
Well, Stu, it's great to be with you. Want to be very clear on this. What I'm proposing in Florida is a Bitcoin reserve, not just pure crypto. Crypto's a lot of different currencies in a basket. Bitcoin is proven to be a holder of value over the long term. Stu, I remember back in 2015 when Bitcoin was just this new niche thing that was starting up. You could have picked up a Bitcoin for $500 a coin. Now 82,000 at the current level. It was at 100. It was lower than that last year. What Bitcoin has proven, because there's only but so many coins that can ever be created, that's the entire way it was structured, is that it could be similar to gold in a holder of value over the long term, especially considering the fact that through our current Federal Reserve System, the dollar actually is diminished over time, the way that the Federal Reserve prints dollars because of Congress's reckless inability to control spending over the long term. So having a Bitcoin reserve as a part of your portfolio actually helps to provide value for the state long term.
But Congressman, there's a point of principle involved here. Why should the government support a particular asset class? I mean, you could have a national S&P 500 stock reserve, and the government would be backing stocks. What you've got is a crypto reserve, so the government is backing that asset. What happens if it goes down? You've no guarantee it's going to go up.
No, there's no guarantees in anything, but there's a reason why we also have strategic petroleum. Like we do hold in a state's portfolio a basket of securities. In the pension funds in every state in the country, there's a basket of securities that uphold that pension fund. Why do we do that? Because there is a generally held belief that securities over time will outstrip inflation and they will outstrip tax policy. And so there's an ability for people to increase their portfolios. I mean, that's basic portfolio theory right there, Stu, for anybody who has a 401k. They put it in securities. There's no reason that the state can't mirror some of that with a Bitcoin reserve. And I will also add, again, if you look at the trend lines over the last 10 years, it's without a doubt, it's been able to not just hold its value, it's massively expanded its value. And considering what is happening with fiat currencies, including the U.S. dollar, there's no reason to think that the Bitcoin valuation won't be able to stabilize itself or grow over the long term. Last thing.
So all those points are well taken. I can't tell you that he's right. I think it's right. That's my view. You're going to have to form your own view on that. Everybody is responsible for their financial decisions. But it seems like things are headed in that direction. Now, things that are not headed in that direction are the current fiat price of a range of cryptocurrencies. And as we said earlier, stocks, Bitcoin is now down below 79,000 from its peak of around, I think, 107 or 108,000. I have no problem with that whatsoever. I don't judge the long-term success of Bitcoin based on its current fiat price. I am one of the people that holds it. I'm not trying to earn additional fiat currency. I think it's potentially going to be a global strategic reserve currency, and that other currencies will be pinned to the value of Bitcoin. I think there's a reason that the BRICS nations are setting up Bitcoin mining operations in smaller countries all across the world. That is a trend I've been following for a long time. It's always possible to be wrong about these things. But if you're planning to hold Bitcoin, which Donald Trump is, and I think I grabbed a clip for that about holding Bitcoin. Perhaps I did not. But Trump talked about how when you get Bitcoin, you hold and you never sell. That is my policy as well. In that case, if the Bitcoin price drops dramatically, you get more of it with less of your fiat currency. You can also conceptually flip it around and think, well, maybe Bitcoin is stable and the value of the fiat currency is what's dropping as the markets are being shifted. And potentially, Trump has said we're bringing a lot of those dollars around the world back on shore. We'll see how that goes. One would expect that upon the announcement of the U.S. government having a strategic Bitcoin reserve, the Bitcoin price might spike. People might believe, well, that must be a safer investment Therefore, I want to invest in that. So the fact that it's not going up and is actually going down means there are theoretically lots of people out there selling their Bitcoin. Now, I don't know how that's working, but I suggested on Devolution Power Hour on Saturday night that potentially it's my view that one of the processes we are witnessing in the domain of drainage is that money that has been laundered, and what we've seen for the last however many years, certainly longer than a decade, is that the regime increases the fiat money supply by just creating new fiat currency from nothing and then laundering that money and paying off whoever is necessary to implement their agenda worldwide and enrich certain parties. And of course, they're able to move and influence markets through control over information. Censorship and propaganda are major tools in doing that, especially online via Twitter, etc. So if you want to eliminate that fiat money supply that was printed from nothing, and you want to potentially unlaunder that money from those who got it in totally criminal ways, then you would seize those assets and then flush them back through the market, which you could do using cryptocurrency as a medium. And I think that the Sam Bankman-Fried example does a lot to explain some of this. And then ultimately that cryptocurrency would have to be flushed back out into the market, allowing people to acquire it. Trump signs a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and the American government doesn't immediately go out and purchase at market prices as much Bitcoin as it possibly can. Those things are a little strange. So I'm wondering what it is that has created not only just a price stabilization as we saw through the weekend, but today in particular, a major drop-off. We will have to see as things go on. Let's just take a second and we'll do drainage today. I love this clip, and it's a good way to visualize what I was just referring to.
That land has been had. Nothing you can do about it. It's gone. It's had.
If you would just take this lease, Daniel.
Drainage! Drainage, Eli, you boy. Drain dry. I'm so sorry. If you have a milkshake, and I have a milkshake, and I have a straw, there it is. That's a straw, you see. Watching. And my straw reaches across the room and starts to drink your milkshake. I drink your milkshake. I drink it up.
Don't bully me, Daniel.
So Daniel Plainview, played by Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood, would be Donald Trump in this example, and Paul Dano would be all of those corrupt actors of the global regime who I believe are getting drained, and I hope that I'm right. If I'm not right, again, I said this on DPH on Saturday night as well, the patterns are all there, which means that the patterns are valid and the patterns are repeating and new information tracks on to these understandings. The problem with that is that new information might track onto the exact opposite inverted understanding, and that scenario is actually quite scary. So that would mean we're being dog walked into this dystopia, probably worse than we could ever imagine, because Donald Trump would be the one leading us there. I don't think that's the case, and obviously I wouldn't be doing this show if I thought that was the case. I am talking about how he's hijacking that great reset narrative and diverting it. And to prove that, I think the best proof of that is that Donald Trump has been singularly the greatest catalyst for this mass awakening worldwide. I don't understand why that would have happened if not for the attempt to hijack the Great Reset agenda and narrative on behalf of the American people. And that sort of thing actually does track with Donald Trump's political philosophy and ideology over the course of decades, where Donald Trump helping out globalists and technocrats, techno-libertarians, neo-Kabbalists, etc., does not track his long-term political philosophy at all. So I don't think that it's getting drained. Or I do think that it's getting drained. I don't think that that Donald Trump is dog-walking us into that great dystopia. Let us continue. Scott Bessent from that same crypto summit.
Trump has signed the executive order to establish the strategic Bitcoin reserve and stockpile. We're going to position the United States as a leader among nations in the digital asset strategy. It's important for the United States to recognize this fact and get ahead of the other nations in the digital age. We applaud the President's direction to use the digital assets already in possession of the nation, and we are going to establish this Bitcoin reserve. We use this authority to augment the asset side of the United States balance sheet. As I've said many times, President Trump is creating assets for the American people, while most past presidents have created debt. And a large part of this asset program can be in digital assets. We are going to end the regulatory weaponization against digital assets. The Biden administration's actions did nothing other than punish innovators, and that all of you have made it here today is really a testament to your fortitude. Much of Treasury's responsibility in this order relates to the tax code and determinations around risk weightings, and I'm here to assure you that we are going to work with the controller of the currency, the IRS, and we're going to rescind and amend all applicable previous guidance. And we are going to put a lot of thought into the stablecoin regime. And as President Trump has directed, we are going to keep the U.S. the dominant reserve currency in the world, and we will use stablecoins to do that. Thank you.
So he's going to be creating new asset classes for the American people, where prior presidents have just created more debt. Prior administrations have just created more debt. He also says they're going to rescind lots of the guidance from the IRS. And what was that last part right there? Sorry about that. I wanted to make one more comment here.
We are going to put a lot of thought into the stablecoin regime.
Ah, yes, now I remember. So they're going to keep the U.S. dollar as the dominant reserve currency. The exact opposite is being suggested all around the world. There was an article this morning in The Economist. Let me just see if I can pull that up quickly. Here we are. About how Donald Trump doesn't actually want a strong dollar. Here's the headline. Does Donald Trump really want a weaker dollar? And pardon, this is from yesterday. It's amusing because The Economist actually puts Donald Trump and J.D. Vance together. So they admit that Bessent wants a strong dollar and says Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, as if Vance has anything to do with it, are interested in pursuing policies that will only weaken the dollar. They say the Trump administration is not speaking with one voice. Scott Bessent, the new Treasury Secretary, has stressed that the strong dollar policy is still in place, but both President Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, as vice president, have argued for a weaker currency, saying the greenback strength is a problem for American industry. Messrs. European nonsense. Trump and Vance may therefore welcome the fact that their new ultra-aggressive trade policies are ripping through currency markets. Why is Vance being tied to this policy? These are not Vance policies. They are Trump policies. Skipping down, they write, what would a weaker greenback mean for the world? The past decade has been especially difficult for emerging markets where firms and governments borrow in dollars. A slump would provide them with some relief. In America, the immediate impact would be felt most keenly by the Federal Reserve. The country is less import dependent than many others, but a declining dollar would, by driving up the cost of imported goods, complicate the already difficult task of managing persistent inflation. And the Economist, of course, is a mouthpiece of that global regime. There is no doubting that. So it is key to understand that that is their perspective. And they have no interest in making Donald Trump look good in any way, though they might have interest in making J.D. Vance look important. Scott Bessent also gave a speech before the New York Economic Club. Actually, before, the one last thing I wanted to say about that Bessent clip. So he wants to keep the dollar strong. He wants to do that with the use of stable coins, and that would be Tether. And all of that aligns really interestingly with Rumble as an emerging free speech and video platform, because Rumble is soon to be implementing Bitcoin payments. So if you want to make donations or leave Rumble rants in Bitcoin or in Tether. So they're incorporating both of those onto the platform, which is really interesting because Rumble, of course, is tied in with Truth Social. The CEO, Chris Pavlovski, has an active account on Truth Social, and Truth Social exists in the Rumble cloud, Rumble's cloud service. So there's a tie-in right there, and it's similar communities on each one of those platforms. The integration with Bitcoin and Tether in particular seems to speak well of both of those. So let's go to Bessent's speech at the New York Economic Club. His remarks, the transcript from March 6th, is at treasury.gov. And he noted, first, I will address, he has three major topics in the speech. We're going to focus on this first one. But he says, I will address a critical aspect of our domestic economic agenda, responsibly deregulating the financial sector to accelerate what I call the re-privatization of the economy. And so the only reason for a re-privatization would be that first something had been nationalized. That is a pretty bold statement when we're talking about the banking industry at large. He says I began my financial career as a financial sector analyst. I quickly learned that a strong yet efficient regulatory framework is needed to mitigate risk and protect taxpayers' hard-earned dollars. The regulatory overreach of the past few years in pursuit of political agendas has missed material risk, stymied growth, and squashed innovation. The Trump administration aims to make financial regulation more efficient, effective, and appropriately tailored. President Trump's recent executive order that requires the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, and the Federal Reserve to submit regulatory actions for review at the Office of Management and Budget, that's Russell Vought, will improve analytical rigor and discipline while increasing accountability. The supervisory failures at the heart of the 2023 banking crisis under fake and illegitimate President Joe Biden should have been a wake-up call. As the Fed's review noted, its supervisors did not fully appreciate Silicon Valley Bank's vulnerabilities as it grew in size and complexity. When risks were identified, they did not take sufficient steps to ensure that SVB fixed those problems quickly. The result was the third largest bank failure in U.S. history. It was a supervisory failure. And he goes on. But the re-privatization or privatization in the first place versus nationalization will become a major issue. I used this example at GART over the weekend. If we think about a company like Facebook and now Meta, they've been involved, or at least the platform has been a mechanism for an entire range of corruption and criminality, crimes against the American people, violations of human rights, and crimes against humanity, to the extent that the platforms were used, and social media platforms at large, perhaps not specifically Facebook in every case, but human trafficking, drug trafficking, money laundering, etc. The influence of markets on behalf of governments and corporations, the influence on elections, the restrictions on freedom of speech at the request of government, the platforms working as state actors. And of course, as I've discussed for 5 years now, the platforms initially began as DoD, tech infrastructure, DARPA, tech infrastructure and development, funding from organizations like COINTELPRO. We talked about that in the Badlands Story Hour episode about the social network a few weeks back. So they start out as government affiliated, and then we're told that they become public companies so that people can invest in them. And of course, those investments are then just extracted out by actual market movers. The retail investments keep flooding in. Market movers keep changing the markets ahead of where retail can catch up. The retail investor gets continuously screwed. That's something that was brought to light certainly by the GameStop events of a few years ago, the Wall Street apes, etc. That whole movement. To the extent to which these companies have been involved in crimes against humanity, influencing of elections, the censorship of free speech, those are crimes that one would expect the government might punish. And there's certainly the legal infrastructure for punishing those crimes. Now, that legal structure, perhaps in a perfect world under the original Constitution, might not exist in the way that would allow this sort of thing. But considering that the government itself was partially involved in doing all of these things, I think it's necessary that that adjustment occurs and we can figure out what we're building next after that point. I agree with people like Steve Bannon who believe that we are in a fully post-constitutional order. And if you believe in devolution or some form of military government, which I do, then the original Constitution isn't in play anyway. So we can be principled in our referrals to that original Constitution in perhaps what the founders intended and talk about how that's an illustration of how far afield we've run. But in terms of punishing all of this, what do you do with a company like that? One would expect it would be nationalized and then re-privatized, potentially broken up and re-privatized. But we shall see. Will social media companies become like utilities? Will Amazon become the U.S. Postal Service? Is that a re-privatization of the Postal Service in process, what we're witnessing? Potentially. We have to think about these things. And then the question becomes, if one of these organizations must be punished and their assets or some portion of their assets must be seized, and this stuff has been decided in courts or however, when a company that we've always understood to be a private corporation or a publicly traded corporation is then nationalized, well, is that then the government combining with corporations? Is that communism? Is it state ownership over these corporations? Is it fascism where they're colluding? Well, we know that situation already exists in the global regime's governmental corporate infrastructure, organizations like the World Economic Forum, et cetera, moving exactly in that direction. So what does it mean if we're already there and then it's seized back? I've said for years that it's clear Elon Musk did not purchase for $44 billion the greatest information weapon in the history of the world, used to overthrow governments and move markets. And he certainly didn't do it by purchasing it from people who are already billionaires and use it to move markets and become richer and overthrow governments and implement their agenda worldwide. So what did happen there? And that was kind of the seminal moment, the impetus for the drainage theory in general. So I hope all of that makes sense, but we're going to watch this dynamic as it moves back and forth over time. And it's going to be a very interesting and confusing sort of thing to interpret, as many of these things are. You know, we talk about that train as it rides through the canyon down the tracks, and you have this is a Western movie, by the way, and you have one gang on horseback riding down the right side, one gang on horseback riding down the left side, you know, black hats and white hats, not in the way that people commonly talk about it, but in the old Western movie sense, which is similar, yes. Both those gangs arrive to meet the train at the same time. One gang starts shooting at the other, back and forth. One of those gangs is going to live. One of those gangs is going to die or run off. And it's important to know which one it is. But for a time, they'll both be on that train, barreling down the tracks through the canyon together. They're both going to be headed in exactly the same direction with exactly the same vehicle. And it's going to be a matter of who wins that battle after they're both already on the train. And I would suggest, as we started out, that that's exactly where we are with the tech libertarians and the rest of this great reset agenda. So it has to be properly seized by Trump, which requires a proper understanding of what's happening by the people, or else we cannot hijack the narrative and we cannot get there. And I would suggest that as much as people believe they have fought over these past many years to get there on the right side, it turns out that many of the people on the Trump side were not actually fighting that battle. They were fighting the same political battle on behalf of the Republican establishment that they were always fighting. And maybe their political views about their ideology have changed. They have shifted from Mitt Romney to J.D. Vance, which isn't actually shifting. Or they've shifted from John McCain to being, rather than a warmonger, neoconservative, now they are an anti-war kind of Trump, but still establishment GOP conservative, someone like Ron DeSantis or, again, J.D. Vance saying, no, well, you know, we shouldn't be funding Ukraine, but of course it's all real. And these are still democracies and blah, blah, blah. There are many people who voted for Donald Trump and are still total neocons when it comes to Israel and when it comes to the view of America's role in the world. And so the interests are aligned, but that doesn't make them the same interests. It just so happens that we are riding down the tracks through the canyon on the same train for now. That thing's still going to split off. And you can see it in some of the, even among the kind of MAGA base, you can see a difference forming between the people who are just invariably trusting the plan forever, not bothering to understand the plan. And of course, they cannot describe what the plan actually is. They just know that there is a plan, and that any criticism of anyone around Trump threatens unity, which is going to kill us in the 2026 midterms. And it's going to make it so that J.D. Vance can never be our new ruler, and grovel, whatever. Okay, let's take a brief break. It was an hour and a half opening rant. I saw some Rumble rants. John in Connecticut, $5 on elections. One can't support, meaning vote for, a reconstructed government without committing the crime of rebellion against the organic constitutional government. This is what's going on. And another $5 rant. He says the pre-14th Amendment organic constitutional government. And I would suggest pre-11th Amendment as well. I would also suggest that because we have a bunch of people watching today, if you are watching on Rumble, please go ahead and hit that thumbs up. That does help the videos do whatever they can do within whatever algorithm Rumble has for its leaderboard and its recommended videos, etc. If you could do that, that would be absolutely great. And Cara MAGA, I see your Rumble rant as well. And don't worry, we're getting there. It's great timing. I got to tell you, great timing. We're almost to the moment everyone has been waiting for. This is the New York Post from over the weekend. Actually, this article is from yesterday, but the story was from the end of last week. AOC teams up with Florida Republican Representative Anna Paulina Luna for bill capping credit card interest at 10%. Yep. Wow. Also, Cara MAGA, $20 Rumble rant said APL, and we know what that means. All right. Now that we've got that out of the way, 2 millennial congresswomen have become unlikely allies on legislation to cap credit card interest rates at 10%, a policy that President Trump previously pitched on the 2024 campaign trail. And that's the most important part. Representatives Anna Paulina Luna, who's 35, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is also 35, who usually find themselves on the opposite sides of issues, unveiled legislation Friday to immediately stop credit card interest rates from jumping above 10%. Do they find themselves on opposite sides of issues? Well, ostensibly, the answer is definitely yes, unless, of course, AOC is a Judas goat working on behalf of the anti-regime faction, as some people have theorized, or that Panoonah Banka is working on behalf of the Uniparty, as some people have theorized. I don't trust anybody, and I don't give the benefit of the doubt to anyone but Donald Trump. So it is entirely possible, in my estimation, for these people to be on the same side. Maybe that's the good side. Maybe it's the bad side. Maybe it is one of those factions along the bad side. It seems like it's the good side. Regardless, this policy has to happen and will happen. And Donald Trump obviously knew that it was coming, which is why he began supporting it last year. Or they're attempting to draft on what Donald Trump is doing and then take credit for the Uniparty in the Congress for something that Donald Trump initiated and for something that the credit card companies may have no say over whatsoever, because their usurious credit card interest rates shouldn't be legal in the first place. For too long, credit card companies have abused working class Americans with absurd interest rates, trapping them in an almost insurmountable amount of debt, Luna said in a statement. And as a person who's used credit cards and dealt with credit card debt at various points in my life, I totally understand that, especially over the last few years when credit card interest rates have absolutely exploded. And even for people with good credit ratings who have been customers or had that particular credit card for years or decades with rates like 25 up to 30%. Credit card interest rates, or credit cards with high interest rates, regularly trap working people in endless cycles of debt, AOC argued. At a time when families are struggling to make ends meet, we cannot allow big banks to shake down our communities for profit. And I would, of course, agree. Let us go to some discussion of usury. We talked about a bit of this at various instances last year. And first, when Donald Trump initially brought it up and made it part of his campaign. This here is from Perplexity, and we're just going to go through some highlighted areas to remember how these usurious credit card interest rates came to be. Credit card companies are largely exempt from state usury laws that cap interest rates due to federal laws and court rulings. The 1978 Supreme Court case, Marquette National Bank v. First of Omaha Service Corp., allowed nationally chartered banks to charge the highest interest rate permitted in the state where the bank is located, regardless of where the borrower lives. This enabled banks to incorporate in states with lax or no usury laws like Delaware and South Dakota to avoid interest rate caps. The Depository Institutions Deregulation and Money Control Act of 1980 further exempted federally chartered banks from state usury limits, allowing them to charge out-of-state customers the highest rates possible in the bank's home state. And of course, when you talk about Delaware, for over 5 decades, that is the fake and illegitimate President Joe Biden, who was a corrupt senator working on behalf of the corporations of Delaware to do things exactly like this. Credit card agreements do not need to mention usury since the companies are not bound by those laws. So in summary, while usury laws aim to prevent unreasonably high interest rates on loans, major court decisions and federal laws have essentially exempted credit card issuers from having to comply with those state-level usury limits. How was that something that the American people would have ever supported? And the fact that, of course, they would have never supported it should indicate to just about everyone that there is a necessary point at which all of that is illegitimate if you wind it back far enough. An article from NASDAQ.com, let me just pull that up so I can read you the headline. This is from November 12th, 2010. How a Supreme Court ruling killed off usury laws for credit card rates. The article says the ruling, this being Marquette v. First National Bank of Omaha. And of course, Omaha is Warren Buffettville. The ruling made a sweeping, it's so much less interesting than Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville. This is for boring globalists, whereas that is for drunk fraternity brothers and people in places like Boston. The ruling made a sweeping interpretation of the National Bank Act, a law passed by Congress in 1864. As the United States was 3 years into the Civil War and in desperate need of financing for the Union's war effort. How about that? They needed to create the National Bank Act and force it through with only the Union states so that the Union could get enough money from the global central bankers to be able to defeat Americans after conscripting slaves and other foreigners. Amazing. It's like they fought the Civil War just for this and not to get rid of slavery. How does it happen? The National Bank Act created a way for the federal government to charter its own banks, which could issue banknotes backed by government bonds. What does it mean that Scott Bessent plans to re-privatize the banking industry? What does that mean? And does that have something to do with the economic panic right now? Or was it the initiation of tariffs, the backing off of tariffs, and then Trump saying he couldn't rule out a recession? Which one is it? It's hard to tell. Gosh, it's all so confusing. Let's go back to Bessent for just a second.
Top 10% of Americans are 40 or 50% of consumption. And that is an unstable equilibrium. The bottom 50% of working Americans have gotten killed. We are trying to address that. We're trying to get rates down. And, could we be seeing that this economy that we inherited starting to roll a bit? Sure. And look, there's going to be a natural adjustment as we move away from public spending to private spending. The market and the economy have just become hooked. We've become addicted to this government spending, and there's going to be a detox period.
Addicted to government spending, and there's going to be a detox period. We are seeing the detox period, I would argue. Let's go back to some of this usury business. The National Bank Act of 1863 was passed by Congress during the Civil War to help finance the Union's war effort and establish a national banking system with a uniform currency. And we are moving away from a uniform currency. The dollar will be the base currency, potentially tied to that stable coin. And then there will be a basket of other currencies. And perhaps Bitcoin will be in that mix on the dollar side, potentially, but certainly within the basket of currencies. Skip down to the end here. To drive state banks out of business and transition to the national system, the act levied a 10% tax on state banknotes in 1865, essentially prohibiting their circulation. By 1865, most state banks had either obtained a national charter or closed down. So in the midst of the Civil War, the Republican-controlled Congress was able to pass this major legislation, restructuring the banking system to help finance the war and create a unified national currency, overcoming opposition from states' rights advocates. And you'll remember in Donald Trump's speech last Tuesday, we showed the jacket, the pink jacket of one of the Democrat communists in attendance. And she had written on the arm the text of part of at least the 14th Amendment. Worried about the 14th Amendment being repealed. Worried about Donald Trump taking us back to that pre-Civil War era. Now, is that part of the Great Reset agenda? No, it's not. But that is what's happening, and they know it's happening, which is why they're scared of it. It is this that is being unwound, I would suggest. This is the unwinding of this is the only way to get back to that original Constitution. And so right now the interests are aligned with that techno-libertarian worldview, with the dark Enlightenment worldview, Curtis Yarvin, Peter Thiel, J.D. Vance, the rest. This is something different. And it is amazing, isn't it, how the Civil War was about freeing the slaves. PSYOP has convinced everybody to ignore all of this about the global banking regime, which is a direct cause of why so many Americans are in such crippling debt. It's incredible, isn't it? Let's continue. More from Perplexity. Based on the search results and additional context, here are the main criticisms of the Marquette decision. The nullification of state usury laws. It enabled punishing interest rates, which is what we deal with now, regulatory arbitrage. It incentivized large national banks to move or to incorporate in states with high or non-existent usury caps, leading to a race to the bottom in terms of consumer protections. Because if one bank set up in Delaware can charge 30% interest on a credit card, which means that you really just can't ever get out of debt, then all of them can do it everywhere. Just takes one. Acceleration of subprime lending, and of course we've seen the fallout of that in the 2008 crash. Disproportionate impact on the poor. One more slide from that. Congressional inaction, favoring bank profits over consumer protection, departure from historical norms, going back centuries, if not millennia, to the prohibition of usury, particularly among Christians and among Jews for Jewish customers. And erosion of state authority. So again, in the interest of fragmenting and decentralizing control, moving away from that top-down structure, these decisions get sent back to the states. So if one state wants to eliminate usury laws because It thinks maybe its citizens will be more prosperous that way, and it'll help state economies in a different way rather than just having a credit card company located in that state able to charge outlandish usury rates. Maybe certain states will decide that it's actually better to have citizens that are more prosperous. Maybe they buy more homes, more economic activity, their quality of life is improved dramatically. All of these things are possible. And I don't want to belabor this, and I don't want to focus in too hard on this, but the origin of usury is inextricably tied to the global banking regime in the City of London, the British Crown, and most particularly the Rothschilds. And I know that it's very sensitive anytime you say the Jews, but nonetheless, we have to do this in the interest of truth. This is Wikipedia's entry for court Jew, okay? A Jewish banker who handled the finances of or lent money to royalty and nobility. In return for their services, court Jews, by the way, also known as court factors, gained social privileges, including in some cases being granted noble status. Examples of what would be later called court Jews emerged in the High Middle Ages, when the royalty, the nobility, and the church borrowed money from money changers or employed them as financiers. Among the most notable of these were Aaron of Lincoln and Vivelin of Strasbourg. Jewish financiers could use their family connections to provide their sponsors with finance, food, arms, ammunition, gold, and other precious metals. The rise of absolute monarchies in Central Europe brought many Jews, mostly of Ashkenazi origin, into the position of negotiating loans for the various courts. They could amass personal fortunes and gain political and social influence. However, the court Jew had social connections and influence in the Christian world, mainly through the Christian nobility and the church. Due to the precarious positions of Jews, some nobles could ignore their debts. If the sponsoring noble died, his Jewish financier could face exile or execution. The most famous example of this occurred in Württemberg in 1737 through 1738, when, after the death of his sponsor, Charles Alexander, Joseph Oppenheimer was put on trial and executed. In an effort to avoid such fate, some court bankers in the late 18th century, including Samuel Bleichroder, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, and Aaron Elias Seligman, successfully detached their businesses from these courts and established what eventually developed into full-fledged banks. So, on behalf of their nobles, the court factors were allowed to charge interest rates and usurious interest rates, and through doing that, the Christian nobility couldn't do that. So they brought in court factors. And through that, they became themselves quite wealthy, occasionally became nobility, and eventually became the regime's central bankers. It's amazing, isn't it? Now, to be clear, we might just simply be talking about the Khazarian mafia who adopted the identity of Jews, and it might not be actual Jews that are responsible for any of this, just people using the identity and the disguise of Jews, people who are Jews and say they're not, to be able to take advantage of this and create the debt regime that now runs the world. Where are we here? Let's take just a quick break, having a look at the Rumble chat. John in Connecticut again. $5. I'll say it again. The 13th Amendment abolished private slavery in the form of involuntary servitude, while the 14th Amendment instituted public slavery in the form of voluntary servitude. And I would suggest that it just made involuntary servitude a different thing. I believe that we still have involuntary servitude under a different name and without the direct physical torture, unless, of course, you work in a factory farm under terrible conditions as an imported slave, immigrant, illegal alien, who has no recourse if he's, for instance, killed or abused on the job. Same thing is true of the women, of course, who are probably sexually abused in addition to whatever hard labor they are doing to never get out of debt anyway, because they still have to they have to work off the debts incurred from coming here. And then, of course, they probably have to pay to live in company towns, essentially, which might as well be slave plantations. If the housing and the medical care and everything is all internal to the corporation who has imported all of these illegal aliens, which should really just simply be called slaves, there's not a difference there. And then, of course, we as normal American citizens are registering our children into the system and are restricted by its rules throughout our entire lives, able to exercise whatever level of freedom we are willing to call freedom, and absolutely not a bit of liberty more than that. Let us also pause for a quick ad from our friends over at Rumble. Weak coffee is for the weak, and no one likes weak people or weak coffee. Rumble has made sure that weak is never part of the mission. In fact, they are strong protectors of free speech. That has been my experience at the very minimum. No fillers, no fraud, no settling for mediocrity, just like 1775 coffee. It's single origin, small farm, hand-picked, specialty grade coffee that stands for quality, free speech, and calling out BS when it matters. Forget stale, mass-produced beans roasted just enough to hide the flaws. Dark roast hits like a Trump tariff. Medium roast keeps it bold without the bitterness. And Vitality Mushroom Blend, real energy and lasting focus. No synthetic garbage. For K-Cup pods, whole bean, or fresh ground coffee, go to 1775coffee.com. Use code STUDIO for 15% off and start your morning with coffee that stands for something. Oh, and every dollar spent enters you to win a Cybertruck and $30,000 in cash. And hopefully, if you are the fortunate winner of that Cybertruck, you will not encounter any deranged lunatics like the guy in the video with which we started the show. Donald Trump, let's just hit one more Trump clip on usury before we switch subjects here.
Americans catch up. We're going to put a temporary cap on interest rates on credit card debt at 10%. Some people are paying 25 and 30%. It's crazy. You know, in theory, that's against the law. Okay, called the usury laws, but in theory, that's against. So we're going to cap it for a period of time at 10%. This election is about the.
So without court decisions like the one we mentioned earlier, protecting the ability for these national banks to do this, and without the implementation of the National Banking Act done totally illegitimately during the Civil War, we would not have any of this. So if we are indeed unwinding through all of this past illegitimacy and unwinding through the Reconstruction Amendments, that as Columbia Law School professor, liberal, communist, global Zionist, George P. Fletcher writes in his book, Our Secret Constitution, was indeed the intent of the Civil War. Put the Reconstruction Amendments in place to overthrow the Constitution, to replace the republic with a democracy, to replace the focus on the individual with the focus on the state, and to replace personal liberty with equality among people. None of this would have been possible. So the reversal of all of these things seems to be the macro trend and the goal of the Make America Great Again agenda, ultimately, or so we can hope. I think we are on track, and I think we're seeing signs that we're on track. But I also think that we are seeing signs that people with aligned interests are also happy to pursue these policies. Maybe it's just in name only because the illegitimate Congress and the illegitimate Senate aren't actually going to pass a usury law. I would put something like that at like a 0.1% chance. I think there is no chance whatsoever, virtually, that that's going to happen. And I'm happy to be wrong, but I don't see how an illegitimate Congress or Senate could do anything like that. And I don't believe that illegitimate Congress people and illegitimate senators should get any credit for something like that, when the credit should only go to the reversal of policies that were illegitimate and unconstitutional in the first place. And to get back all the way to the end of that, you would have to go back at least to the ratification of the 11th Amendment and anything that came past the ratification of the Bill of Rights, for certain. Okay. So over the weekend, Mike Johnson provided a public viewing of his package. And basically everyone is talking about Mike Johnson's package these days, but where did that initiate? This guy. Speaker Johnson unveils bill to fund the government through September 30th. CNN writes, the president himself has been highly supportive of the measure, even though it mostly freezes funding levels left over from the Biden administration. And House GOP leaders believe that his backing will help them win robust support among House Republicans on the floor next week, even as many ultra-conservatives typically loathe such stopgap measures. Johnson hopes to hold the vote Tuesday, that's tomorrow, on the 99-page bill, according to people familiar with the plans. House GOP leadership aide, who is too afraid to give his name, said, or her, it is quite literally as clean a CR as you can draft. And Democrats are not expected to support this bill at all. We have talked now for a few weeks about how Donald Trump has been making statements in support of the passage of a continuing resolution or some kind of budget bill. We were told it was to pass and implement his agenda. Part of that agenda would be to close the border and solve the immigration problem. Donald Trump has already told us that the invasion is over, so we don't need that leverage, and the GOP cannot use that leverage. Although in his speech, Donald Trump did mention that he wants the Congress in that bill to provide funding for him to wage war against the cartels. So maybe that's the part of Mike Johnson's package that we should be thinking about in regard to illegal immigration. We shall see. Trump said that he wanted the bill to balance the budget. That is not going to happen. We were told initially by people like Chip Roy that they would be interested in potentially supporting a CR that would go through June. Trump then went over the top and said September. The package is going to be September. Will the Republicans pass it? That is the question. Donald Trump posted on Truth Social about Mike Johnson's package over the weekend, saying, the House and Senate have put together, under the circumstances, a very good funding bill. And in parentheses, he put CR in quotes. It is assumed that means continuing resolution, but of course there are people trying to decode it. Are they right? I don't know. All Republicans should vote, in parentheses, please, exclamation point, yes, next week. So all Republicans should vote yes next week. Great things are coming for America, and I am asking you all to give us a few months to get us through September so we can continue to put the country's quote-unquote financial house in order. Democrats will do anything they can to shut down our government, and we can't let that happen. We have to remain united in all caps. No dissent in all caps. Fight for another day when the timing is right. Very important in all caps. Make America great again. Exclamation point in all caps. So making it very clear that he wants this CR passed. He needs this money from Congress to be able to implement his agenda and keep America's financial house in order for lo these many months. Now, I've said many times, I think that the government shutdown is going to occur at the same time we hear that the global banking regime has taken the $300 billion in seized Russian state-owned and oligarch assets and redeploys it in support of the Ukraine war. We're going to get that story and we'll get the shutdown story at the same time because they can both explain economic collapse in a way that leaves hands nice and clean, the same way they did in 2020. Now, is that the Great Reset or is that the hijacking of the Great Reset? Because Klaus Schwab in COVID-19, the Great Reset, describes these sorts of economic adjustments, these global resets. And of course, they're all in response to these totally spontaneous problems that occur in the world. They didn't know Putin was going to stage a very brutal invasion and start a war that happened and ended before this war ever started. No one could have ever known that, which means we could have never known about the economic sanctions on Russia and the seized and frozen Russian assets that would then be redeployed and, as the story goes, crippling the global economy because the faith in the global banking regime would then collapse and the dollar as the reserve currency would then collapse, which is the same result that we hear, as the story goes, will occur if the government shuts down. Oh, our credit rating with these global banks around the world, it's going to collapse and our treasuries will be worth nothing and blah, 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 blah. Will these events happen at the same time? I kind of think that they will happen at the same time. And to illustrate what I believe is the difference between the Great Reset agenda and the hijacking of that Great Reset agenda. In terms of the hijacking, we have Donald Trump in the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, other countries around the world who have gone against that global banking regime and against the regime-controlled countries, most importantly, the British Commonwealth nations, as the Commonwealth collapses as well. I'm going to get to that too. Those countries are part of the BRICS coalition. The BRICS coalition is supporting Bitcoin mining in BRICS and BRICS applicant countries. So that seems like it's potentially part of the future. In opposition to that, we have this.
On your second point, I tend to share your views.
And I should say that this is Christine Lagarde speaking on behalf of the European central banks at a Eurosystem conference.
Nature doesn't like vacuum. And we started working on the digital euro way back. Actually, when I started my term 5.5 years ago. And I'm not claiming, parentality on the digital euro because my colleague Benoît Cœuré had already committed a speech on this matter before I arrived. But I certainly carried on with that project, and subsequently Fabio Panetta on the board and then Piero Cipollone, who has replaced Fabio, have taken the lead together with a very, very good team which is focused on accelerating the pace and hopefully campaigning enough with all the stakeholders, meaning European Parliament, meaning European Council, meaning European Commission, so that we can eventually not put to bed, but put to reality this digital euro. The deadline for us is going to be October of 25, and we are getting ready for that deadline, but we will not be able to move unless the other parties, the stakeholders, as I call them, Commission, Council and Parliament, actually complete the legislative process, without which we will not be able to move. And I think it is critically important, and it seems to the agnostic or the skeptics, it seems to be more relevant and more of an imperative now than ever before, both on the wholesale and on the retail level, both.
So which way do we go? That seems to me to be the Great Reset-oriented approach, whereas Trump's approach, we can hope, is the hijacking and redirection of all of that. All right. Okay, here we go. Let us go to Donald Trump speaking about Russian sanctions. As soon as I can find, oh, there we are. This is what happens when you have like 50 links lined up for an episode. It used to not be this way. I would have like 4 links in my notes, and when I was recording the audio show, just going through stuff, I would pull up more articles on the way, be editing in the process. Now I got to lay the whole thing out and then still think of things on the way that I forgot. Donald Trump on Truth Social on Friday. Based on the fact that Russia is absolutely, quote unquote, pounding Ukraine on the battlefield right now, I am strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions, and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire and final settlement agreement on peace is reached. To Russia and Ukraine, get to the table right now before it is too late. Thank you, with 3 exclamation points. Now let's get back to this part that is only in caps. Final settlement agreement on peace is reached. Is that meant to be read separate from its context or understood separate from its context? It's a possibility. Don't know what the answer is, but it's a possibility. Final settlement agreement on peace is reached. Now, if you believe what I believe, and you don't have to, okay? You don't have to. I'm telling you what I see. And if you can't see it, that's totally fine. I don't want anybody to agree with me. I mean, it's cool if people do agree with me. But my goal is not to get people to agree with me. My goal is to get people to understand that they are being hoodwinked by the television and begin thinking for themselves in an attempt to understand how power actually works and how reality actually functions, so that we can remove that false reality layer, or at least recognize it. And upon recognizing it, it collapses, at least relative to the issues you're dealing with. I can't promise that the entire thing is just going to fall away at once, although it might, and that is a major adjustment, trust me. But not getting hoodwinked is important, and being able to understand these situations and how they are communicated to us is important. The part of Ukraine being fought over that the globalists and neocons continue to say is still Ukraine, and that Ukraine needs to get back, hasn't been Ukraine for years and years and years. They're never getting it back. It's just Russia. And other parts of Ukraine are going to become other countries as well. I think parts of Ukraine will be Poland, and parts will be, I doubt, Moldova, but we'll see. So he talks about sanctions, banking sanctions, and tariffs on Russia. Now, banking sanctions were applied against Russia. Economic warfare was waged by the banking regime at the beginning of 2022, when Putin launched his quote-unquote very brutal invasion. Well, I guess not quote-unquote on that, but what they what they refer to, what I refer to as Putin's very brutal invasion, and what they refer to as his full-scale invasion or brutal invasion. February 2022, so it's been over 3 years since then. The banking sanctions never worked. They made Russia's economy stronger. Tariffs on Russia, well, whatever. And these other sanctions, these could be Trump-level sanctions, and I'm not suggesting that these are the same things, but in Executive Order 13848 and 13818, certain sanctions were imposed for a series of crimes or violations or what have you. So there are other kinds of manipulations that can be applied by Trump via the U.S. government that do not include or are not the same as global regime banking sanctions, though those were used in the past under the guise of being American government actions, when in fact the American government was just controlled by the banks. So they were banking actions laundered through and in the disguise of American government actions. None other than John Bolton was on CNN discussing exactly this. And I got to say, I find it humorous. We did do this on Devolution on Saturday night, but I think it's worth putting on here as well.
How does this president go from talking about sanctions in the morning against Russia to essentially saying their strategy of pounding Ukraine is what anybody would do in this situation and taking advantage of the president's position?
Well, because I think he knew that the so-called threat this morning was totally hollow, as did Vladimir Putin. And he did it simply to try and show some kind of balance given the things he had said about Zelensky and the Ukrainians. If you look at the statement about the actual threat, he threatens three things: banking sanctions, sanctions, and tariffs. Now, I'll assume there's banking sanctions are just a subset of sanctions. I don't know why you would have two separate things. But let's take tariffs first. I don't understand it. Who knows? But on tariffs, Russian exports to the United States last year, the only year we have full statistics, were a little bit less than $3 billion, which is trivial compared to the total volume of U.S. trade with the rest of the world. And in fact, in 2021, in other words, the last full year before Russia's invasion in 2022, they were about $30 billion. So over this period of time since the invasion, U.S. imports from Russia have already shrunk 90%. So the tariff thing is effectively meaningless. Banking sanctions, if there are banking sanctions we haven't imposed on Russia, I'd like to know why not. But in any event, as with really all the sanctions that have been imposed, and this is a general problem for sanctions, Russia has very successfully evaded, particularly the financial sanctions, moving through China's opaque financial system to get into global markets. So I think Putin completely understood that threat was totally hollow.
And perhaps it was. But Trump goes out and talks about how hard he's been on Russia all these times. So when they say that he's in Putin's pocket, it's really hard to keep that claim going while they're also reporting on Trump posts saying that he's going to put all sorts of sanctions on Russia while they are, quote unquote, pounding Ukraine. I also have to wonder if the quotes around pounding are specifically to do with the British pound as the Commonwealth collapses. Let us take a pause. We're going to do another one of these Rumble ads. I'm going to have a look at the chat, and then we will continue with all of the foreign policy affairs. So much going on. I think that we are at a good pace right now, getting caught up from the days away. A lot of people watching on Rumble today, and potentially for the first time, I would imagine. So hello to all of you. I hope you're enjoying yourself. And you can find the show's home at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can follow the Telegram info stream at t.me/very reasonable. And I'm your moderator on Truth Social, as far as social media goes. And then Getter as well. And Gab, if you're over there, but I don't use those very often. And then, of course, Rumble and YouTube, and subscribing in either or both of those places is the thing to do. And I would certainly appreciate it. Go ahead and hit thumbs up as well if you are watching on Rumble. And speaking once again of Rumble, this sponsorship is from them. When Rumble first started in 2013, they built the platform for the small creator. They didn't censor or have biases. They were fair and treated all creators equally. No one thought platforms would censor political conversations or censor opinions on COVID, but they did. Facebook admitted they fell to pressure from the Biden-Harris administration. And I just got to tell you, for myself, I never expected that people would be wearing 2 masks in their cars. But they did. And somehow they still do. And as I was just in airports over the weekend, flying back and forth to Las Vegas, I got to see that there are quite a few Americans still, sadly, wearing masks. I guess because of the measles outbreak in Texas or something. What are they wearing masks for? These people are insane. Actually, sadly, they're just mentally damaged from one of the most powerful psyops of all time, which woke a lot of people up. And it was a fake pandemic. So, hey, I don't know what to say about that. Rumble did not censor anyone. They held the line. They are attacked daily for giving us a voice to talk to you. They are attacked in corporate media. They are attacked by governments like France. They are attacked from brand advertisers who refuse to work with them. Corporate America is fighting to remove speech. Rumble is fighting to save it. Watching this show on Rumble is the most Rumble's going to ask from you. But if you really believe in this fight and you have the means, one major way you can help Rumble survive is by joining Rumble Premium. That will also allow you to watch the Wednesday subscriber stream live here on Rumble. I'll post it on Rumble, just like always. But if you want to watch live, you got to have Rumble Premium. It's also going to be streamed, of course, on Substack for paid subscribers on Substack. Join the community that believes in the First Amendment and believes in our human right to free speech. Rumble is offering $10 off with the promo code STUDIO. When you purchase an annual subscription, go to rumble.com/premium. Use promo code STUDIO. And again, if it's not something that you can afford to do, if that's going to put a financial hurt on you, don't do it. Just keep watching, okay? My shows will continue to go up for free all over the place. If not the day of, then a few days later, the subscriber stream on Wednesdays is going to be for paid subscribers on Substack and for premium subscribers on Rumble. So that's Rumble Premium. It's not even to do with my show, but if you are on Rumble Premium, you'll be able to watch it on there. If you are also a paid subscriber on Substack, I'm saying. And then that episode is going to go up for free to everyone on Sunday morning, as always. Okay? So let's get into some of the stuff that is happening all around the world. I'm just taking one last look at the chat to make sure everyone's chilling. Everything is pretty good. And as I said, if you are watching or listening on Rumble, please go ahead and hit that thumbs up. All right, let's go to Badlands Media today. We're just going to hit on this quickly. Russia accuses Britain of sabotaging U.S. peace efforts in Ukraine. Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service has labeled Britain the world's biggest warmonger, accusing the UK of undermining U.S. attempts to secure peace in Ukraine. And of course, the funders of all wars, both sides, for centuries, is the British Crown. In the non-national city-state, the City of London, the British Crown bankers using the British monarchy, the world's longest running reality show, as their meat puppets to wage these wars. They are the biggest warmongers. And of course, neoconservatives worldwide are servants of that very same global banking regime. It is no surprise, therefore, that they are ideological descendants of Trotsky and, let's just say, other communist and socialist movements over time on behalf of these same regime bankers. And it just so happens that they're seeming to always attack Russia. It's weird, isn't it? As we can see, London today, just as it did on the eve of both world wars of the last century, acts as the main instigator of the global conflict. At the same time, the British themselves, obviously, are again counting on sitting it out on their island, a Kremlin spokesperson said. Russia's SVR intelligence agency warned that it was time to expose Britain and deliver a clear signal to the treacherous Albion and its elites. You will not succeed. The agency also blamed Britain for starting the Second World War. The SVR further claimed that British authorities were working to undermine Donald Trump's peacekeeping efforts and disrupt the improving relations between Russia and the U.S. Russia also announced on Monday that it is expelling 2 British diplomats from its embassy in Moscow over allegations of espionage. According to a statement from Russia's Federal Security Service, the FSB, the diplomats provided false personal information when applying for entry into the country and were involved in alleged intelligence and subversive activities that pose a threat to Russia's security. The FSB did not present any evidence to support its claims. And I want to find out some of the history about this term Albion. It is an ancient and poetic name for Britain or England, often associated with its historical and mythological origins. The term is thought to derive from the Latin albus, white, or Proto-Indo-European white, likely referencing the iconic white cliffs of Dover, which are visible to travelers approaching Britain across the English Channel. This is very interesting. Is this related to Aryans? It's not directly, it says. In contrast, Perplexity says, Aryans refers to an ethno-linguistic group associated with the Indo-Iranians, ancient Persia, that's Xerxes, who spoke Indo-European languages and migrated from Central Asia into regions such as India, Iran, and beyond around 1500 BCE. And that's what it says now, of course. So, doesn't it sound exactly like what we were told Aryan means? But let's just focus on Indo-European for a second and go back up to Albion or Albion. The term is thought to derive from the Latin albus, white, or Proto-Indo-European white. How about that? No relation whatsoever, so saith the machine. It can't all be the same thing, just playing out over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. That's not how the world works. It's all just spontaneously occurring based on people pursuing their own individual interests in a way that just so happens to end up with total top-down control from the global central banking cartel in the city of London. I don't know how it happens. I really do find it strange, especially when people who are more truther-oriented imagine that there is no centralized form of control or that it is somehow impossible. Where do these people come from? It makes no sense. Of course, there's control. You can see it always going back to the same sources. And if you keep tracing further back than that, it's just good versus evil. And we know where the source of that is. Okay, let us continue with our great neighbors to the north, the 51st state, a.k.a. Canada.
In first place, the next Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, with 131,674 votes, resulting in 29,457 allocated points, representing 85.9% of the vote.
Now, you might have just seen in there Chrystia Freeland, whose grandfather was a Nazi propagandist, who is a major servant of the World Economic Forum. She was the other candidate who might have been the leader of the Liberal Party, which would be the next prime minister, supposedly. So she was the one in the contest with this man, Mark Carney, but Mark Carney won, and she just had a big smile on her face and was clapping real hard. Oh, I'm totally down with supporting the team. It's like the Hillary Clinton of Canada. You will notice in the background all these people holding up these signs. If those signs simply said different things and weren't all red, we might believe we were at the Democrat National Convention. Isn't it crazy how they just use all the same tactics? These big cheers. Oh, how popular this man is. Let's keep going for a minute.
We've just had the announcement that Mark Carney is now the new Prime Minister of Canada and the leader, of course, of the Liberal Party. And he won by a pretty astonishing 85% of the vote. We're expecting to hear from him soon, but let's go straight to Diana Magnay, our international correspondent. Diana, not only has he won, but he has won resoundingly.
That was an astonishing difference between him and Chrystia Freeland, the number two, who's long been Deputy Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, who resigned at the end of last year. She only got 8% of the vote, and Mark Carney coming in with nearly 86%. That is absolutely astonishing. He promised a mandate for change within the Liberal Party, and I think that's clearly what people wanted. They wanted someone who was an economic strong hand, which Mark Carney, having been both Governor of the Bank of England through Brexit, Governor of the Bank of Canada too, is something that, economics is his bread and butter. And I think also this was clear that they just wanted to move away from the politics of the last decade of Justin Trudeau, with whom Chrystia Freeland was so closely implicated. Mark Carney is a very, very solid figure in terms of the economy and therefore dealing with Donald Trump, but he doesn't have political experience in the way that Chrystia Freeland did. He's never been a politician, but in his own words, he has been a leader. You don't lead institutions like that unless you have considerable experience leading organisations. And he has a very, very difficult job on his hands in terms of this tariff war with Donald Trump. But clearly, the Canadian Liberals felt that he was the man to combat Donald Trump rather than Chrystia Freeland.
Poor Chrystia. Very, very sad for her. You will notice, by the way, that building wasn't all that big. That was about the size of a high school gymnasium. Maybe there were 400 or 450 people there. I could be wrong. Could be bigger than that. I would say it's definitely not bigger than 700. I used to think about these things a lot because in the nightclub industry, you deal with capacity issues, of course, because you're going to fill up the nightclub. And so you have an idea, or a concert venue or whatever, of how many people will fit on a floor, what the capacity there is. And then when it's full, you know about how many people you have. So I've been able to eyeball that pretty successfully in my life. That wasn't a lot of people there. They kind of shot it as though it was a stadium packed with supporters, but that was a pretty mild affair that they made look like a rock concert, and they made him, Mark Carney, look like a rock star despite being named Carney. And now, I'm not saying he is actually a carnival worker, certainly not traveling, and I'm not suggesting that he has any strange appendages or anything. Just saying his last name's Carney. Canada's Liberal Party chooses Mark Carney to succeed Justin Castro. So someday, our boy True will no longer be the Prime Minister of Canada, but it is not quite today, as we will see as we go down here. While Carney will take over immediately as Liberal Party leader, Trudeau will remain as Canada's Prime Minister for an as yet undisclosed transitional period while his successor settles in. Well, maybe it's going to be 2 days. Maybe it'll be 2 weeks, 2 months. Who knows? Maybe it'll be till September when our government funding for the 51st state runs out. Just kidding. It'll probably happen on Friday. In his first remarks following the results of the vote, Carney referenced the tensions with the U.S., saying his government would, quote, create new trading relationships with reliable trading partners. Good luck, Commie. He also vowed to keep retaliatory tariffs on the U.S., quote, until the Americans show us respect. Once again, keep waiting, Commie. I mean, come on, man. That's never going to happen until you become the 51st state. New threats demand new ideas and a new plan, he told the Liberal Party convention on Sunday. Slamming the Trump administration's tariff plans, Carney said of the U.S. president, he's attacking Canadian families, workers, and businesses, and we cannot let him succeed, and we won't. Okay. In trade, as in hockey, Canada will win, he added. And yes, Canada won the Four Nations face-off a couple weeks back in overtime in the finals. The U.S. won the round-robin game, and a bunch of people who don't watch any hockey went just absolutely bonkers over it, thinking that they were showing everyone how patriotic they were. The ripple effects of the tense relations with the U.S. have spread through Canadian society, with fans at NHL and NBA games in Canada even booing the U.S. national anthem. Wowie zowie. I can't believe it. What an incredible, incredible statement.
Wow. Wowie, wow, wow, wow.
Are those kind of protests real and organic? Are those the Canadian people expressing themselves? I kind of doubt it. In fact, I think perhaps it's
fake.
I'm stunned. I'm shocked. How many times did you do this?
All the time.
A new one. You didn't even see that one coming. We've never even really talked about it before. Unpredictable. Carney will now face off with conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who has previously been compared to Trump, but now seeks to distance himself from the U.S. leader, reiterating at a press conference earlier this week that he is, quote unquote, not MAGA. Isn't that incredible? What have I been calling Pierre Poilievre for 3 years now? 4 years? Canadian Ron DeSantis. Because he is Canadian Ron DeSantis. And now he has, in my estimation, gotten considerably punked by this whole thing. They're like, oh, you're going to get Trudeau out of there? How about we replace him with a guy that is going to be even worse than Trudeau, the Joe Biden or Lula model, many such cases. Poilievre was embarrassed last week. He was going to come out strongly against Donald Trump's tariffs, and he looked totally insignificant because our boy True came out even stronger than Poilievre did. So he is very much like Ron DeSantis. The story is big. They put his clips all over the place to make him look like the most based and red-pilled conservative who has ever existed. And it turns out he's just a uniparty right weakling. Pierre Poilievre is that model. Donald Trump thinks he can weaken us with his plan to divide and conquer. Pierre Poilievre's plan will leave us divided and ready to be conquered, Carney said. So Poilievre is even being taken to task by this new liberal. And wow, we have someone going bonkers in the chat. That, my friends, looked like some spam. He was just saying fart in capital letters over and over and over and over and over again. What kind of madness is this? People have lost their minds. He is now out of the chat, and I assume probably finding a cyber truck to attack. We're just going to keep it rolling. So, this is, I don't know what to make of this. I've been talking now for a couple of weeks about how it's pretty obvious that there is no more British Commonwealth, okay? The TV hasn't said it yet. We might never be told this. Depends on how long they need the British monarchy reality show to continue running. Meghan Markle, I said 4 or 5 years ago, I thought was a double agent meant to bring down the British monarchy. And I feel pretty good about that these days, to be honest. We saw the so-called king of the British Commonwealth invite Donald Trump for a state visit, a second state visit, something that is unprecedented. And by the way, Mark Carney is Canada's Keir Starmer. Okay, same model in both places. We saw Trump be invited for another state visit. We know that the first one, he walked right in front of the Queen, quote unquote, broke all rules of decorum, and they're inviting him back for another trip. That means that the Commonwealth has no power, at minimum. And then we saw last week in Windsor Castle that they had 400 Muslims, no offense to Muslims, but hey, probably not your castle, probably not your Commonwealth, invited into Windsor Castle for a dinner to celebrate Ramadan. Is that something that you do if you are the king of the British Commonwealth and the British Empire, or whatever we're calling it, the United Kingdom? No way in the world. So it turns out there's actually no more Commonwealth. And you can think I'm wrong about that for a while if you want. And then you'll be like, huh, that's weird. There's no more British Commonwealth. And then people who are not capable of thinking properly will still believe that it just happened in a year or 2 years or 3 years, whenever they find out, and that it wasn't right back to right now. But it is right now. Let's go to Instagram and the Royal Historian account. And I believe that this is actually their official account. Now, you will see there a picture of our boy True with the so-called king. And I want you to focus in on how bad this picture is. Now, you'll remember last week, by the way, he received the comedic actor from Ukraine, the fake president whose term has expired. They don't have elections anymore over there because it's not a real country. Volodymyr Zelensky, if you think Trump broke the rules of decorum, Volodymyr Zelensky showed up in a sweatsuit, and we're still supposed to pretend that the British Commonwealth is a real thing. Well, here is their own site showing off the supposed King of England, Charles, His Majesty, King Charles III. Look at this. Look at his mouth. What in the world is this character? I think that's as far in as I can go, sadly. That is an absolutely terrible, awful picture. It couldn't possibly be worse. Why, if there was still a monarchy, a commonwealth, would they be posting the king looking like this? The people who are conscious of image more than anyone ever could be conscious of image. And he looks like a zombie who just finished snacking on brains directly out of the skull. It's incredible. There's no way that can happen in a real way, in the way that television tells you things are real. But here it is. The royal historian, His Majesty, says, His Majesty King Charles III, as King of Canada, has made the following statement to the Canadian people on the occasion of Commonwealth Day. So yesterday was Commonwealth Day. See up here, the letterhead, Buckingham Palace, and then down at the bottom, Charles R, and the rest of it's gone on their official post. Well done, social media team. Last October, leaders from across the Commonwealth, and by the way, if this is somehow not an official account, then sorry, Commonwealth social media team. I'm sure you are better than this. Last October, leaders from across the Commonwealth came together in Samoa to reaffirm their, quote, belief in the value of the Commonwealth as a trusted forum where diverse voices of our member states, the large and the small, the young and the old, come together as one family, end quote. These gatherings are important for helping all Commonwealth nations to tackle the challenges of the day, yet they also play another vital role in these uncertain times where it is all too easy to believe that our differences are problems instead of the source of strength and an opportunity for learning. The Commonwealth's remarkable collection of nations and peoples come together in the spirit of support and, crucially, friendship. This year, the world reflects on the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. More than 1.5 million men and women who served during the war came from across the Commonwealth to support the United Kingdom and its allies. On this special anniversary, we remember with particular pride and everlasting gratitude the untold sacrifice and selflessness of so many from around our family of nations who gave their lives in that dreadful conflict. The Commonwealth's ability to bring together people from all over the world has stood the test of time and remains as ever important today. Leaders recently reiterated the importance of collaboration for peace and human rights, as well as for the restoration of nature, capital N, both on land and in the oceans. As we mark this Commonwealth Day together, there is no more important task than to restore the disrupted harmony of our entire planet. For the sake of our younger generation's threatened future, I can only hope that the Commonwealth will continue its vital work to restore that harmony. Isn't that impressive? People from all across the Commonwealth came to support the United Kingdom and its allies during World War II, after Britain had warmongered itself into a continent-wide conflict, hopefully to defeat Russia, and they didn't. And who did the United States help? Well, as a Commonwealth nation, we helped the British monarchy and the British crown. And we are told that we actually secured the world's freedom and saved the Jews, but that is as true as their story about the Civil War. I guess I should take it as a compliment that we are being heavily bombarded by bots in the chat. And I'll just keep checking back, and I hope that we will get through it together. There's not much else we can do. So we have a totally embarrassing picture of the supposed king with our boy True posted on the very day that our boy True is replaced in the as leader of the Liberal Party in the Commonwealth State of Canada. So Commonwealth Day is celebrated on the second Monday of March. It used to be called Empire Day. It celebrates Queen Victoria's birthday, but it was renamed in 1958 to focus on unity and cooperation among Commonwealth countries, because I guess that they finally determined that calling it Empire Day wasn't really the right look for them. Now, Commonwealth Day, or Empire Day, was initially celebrated in 1898, and that period was known for the beginning of the global Zionist movement with Theodore Herzl, and to be followed within a couple of decades by the Balfour Declaration that brought the United States and other nations to the side of the British monarchy on behalf of the global central bankers, ostensibly to save the free world, not once in World War II or in World War I, but twice again in World War II to set up the Zionist proxy state in Israel as a result. And it's funny because Queen Victoria, whose birthday is celebrated in Empire Day, initiated in 1898, was also fully in support of the Palestine Exploration Fund, a project begun in 1865. The Civil War era tied directly to World War I, World War II, and the Zionist project, all through the crown, the British crown in the city of London. I didn't write the history. I just read it in a non-retarded manner that understands the same powers and forces in the world have dominated global events for much longer than we are told. This is not, in fact, the great American empire. America is just the slave labor state and the military state of that global empire. And of course, we are told that we represent the global reserve currency, which makes us seem economically strong in relation to countries that are being destroyed by the same empire. Speaking once more of the now collapsed British Commonwealth, this is Donald Trump yesterday on Truth Social going after Australia. Malcolm Turnbull, the former Prime Minister of Australia, who was always leading that wonderful country from quote unquote behind, never understood what was going on in China, nor did he have the capacity to do so. I always thought he was a weak and ineffective leader, and obviously Australians agreed with me. And he misplaced an apostrophe there, but we don't need to blame it on DJT, and we don't need to decode it, although for sure people are. And is it a valid decode? I have no idea. It might be, it might not be. I've got no clue, and neither do the people who say they do. Let us continue. Donald Trump talking about one of our other favorite, no longer empire countries. Now, not quite part of the British Empire by name, but nonetheless, this is Donald Trump yesterday on Truth Social. As I made clear during my joint address to Congress, just expanded in a major way. The United States strongly supports the people of Greenland and their right to determine their own future. We will continue to, all caps, keep you safe as we have since World War II. We are ready to, all caps, invest billions of dollars to create new jobs and, all caps, make you rich. And if you so choose, we welcome you to be a part of the greatest nation anywhere in the world, the United States of America. So, all caps in that post, keep you safe, invest billions of dollars, make you rich. Sounds like a pretty good deal if you are Greenland, a country where almost no one lives. Huh. How about that? What a strange thing that has happened to my browser window when you saw it expand so dramatically. And speaking, by the way, of Greenland, let's go down to the bottom of North America. So we got Canada, we got Greenland, we got the collapsing Commonwealth across the ocean. And let's get down to the bottom of the continent. The Panama Canal, which we talked about last week, had just been taken over, or at least the ports there had just been purchased from a Hong Kong-based organization by BlackRock, which Donald Trump referred to as an American company. Here is Maria Bartiromo asking Donald Trump about the Panama Canal.
Two-time commander-in-chief. President Trump has been luring deep-pocketed investors and companies to invest in America since returning to the White House, locking up commitments of some $2 trillion into the United States in his first month back in office. The president told me about his next conquest, the Panama Canal, after news this week that an American company, BlackRock, will acquire 2 ports operating around the Panama Canal from Hong Kong-based CK Hutchison for $23 billion.
China essentially had it. It was a China-based company. I'd much rather deal with BlackRock than a China-based company. And BlackRock is fine. I knew they were doing that. I was totally okay with it.
And when you go through the Panama
Makes
Canal,
it easier.
give
You
us a
understand,
sense of
Jimmy
how China
Carter,
has dominated.
The Carter administration gave the Panama Canal for $1, gave the Panama Canal to Panama for no reason. They had a little demonstration of a few people, and he gave it. It's the most expensive thing we've ever built in the history of our country, relatively. In other words, if you bring it up in today's dollars. We lost 38,000 people to the mosquito and to snakes. Snakes are vicious. They had a very vicious snake. If you got bit, you were in big trouble.
Wow.
But
now, what a strange reaction by Maria. But also, if you remember Donald Trump's poem, The Snake, that he used to read at the rally speeches all the time, I wonder if he's talking about that snake. I don't mean to decode his interview, but let's continue on.
8,000 people to the mosquito and to snakes. Snakes are vicious. They had a very vicious snake. If you got bit, you were in big trouble.
Wow.
But mostly to mosquitoes, malaria. And we built this incredible thing, the 8th wonder of the world, right? You know, it connects 2 oceans, and one ocean is substantially higher than the other. Nobody knows that.
It connects 2 oceans. One ocean is substantially higher than the other. Nobody knows that. I don't know what to make of that.
We built this incredible thing, the 8th wonder of the world, right? You know, it connects 2 oceans, and one ocean is substantially higher than the other. Nobody knows that. That's why you have the locks. And the most incredible thing, and it does great. And we shouldn't have given it. We should have never given it. But we didn't give it to China. We gave it to Panama. And now Panama has gone out and essentially ceded it to China. And until they ripped all the signs down about a week ago, when they saw that I was serious about this, you know, most of the signs were written in Chinese. They were all Chinese all over the place. That wasn't the deal. We're taking the Panama Canal back.
So you're coming up, the Congress is doing this reconciliation.
Taking the Panama Canal back. I thought that comment about the oceans was so interesting. The machine says the Pacific Ocean is generally higher than the Atlantic Ocean, particularly at the Panama Canal, where the sea level on the Pacific side is about 20 centimeters, around 8 inches, higher than on the Atlantic side. This is primarily due to 2 factors. Again, this is the machine. I was one of the people who did not know about this. The Pacific Ocean is less dense than the Atlantic Ocean because it is warmer and fresher, which means it occupies more volume for the same mass. This results in a higher sea level on the Pacific side. And that's one of those things that I'm just going to have to think, if you say so. And apparently, ocean currents and dynamics. Currents can pile up water on the Pacific side, further increasing its sea level relative to the Atlantic Ocean. Okay? So I guess we just have to assume that that's a real thing. Man, I don't know. Stuff like that makes me think maybe the world is not exactly like they always told us. Let's go to one more clip from Trump in this Bartiromo interview.
The problems out there. No.
In fact,
no. What I have said is we spend a lot of money on nuclear missiles, nuclear weapons. The level of destruction is beyond anything you can even imagine. It's just bad that everybody has to spend all this money on something that if it's used, it's probably the end of the world.
Wow. I don't know what to say to that.
You know, when I listen to these climate lunatics and they talk about global warming, and they say the ocean's going to rise 1/8 of an inch in the next 300 years, and and nobody ever talks about nuclear weapons or some of the other things, but the nuclear weapons in particular right now. And they talk about the climate, and they talk about the dangers of the climate, but they don't talk about the dangers of a nuclear weapon, which could happen tomorrow. They say in 300 years, I watched Biden for years say the existential threat. He loved the term existential threat. Our greatest existential threat is from the climate. And I said, no. The greatest is sitting in shelves in various countries called nuclear weapons that are big monsters that can blow your heads off for miles and miles and miles. And they never mention that.
Big monsters that can blow your heads off for miles and miles and miles. Nuclear weapons are greatest existential threat. They would be, if they are used, the end of the world. And now we're about to be told that Iran is going to get one, and Donald Trump has to stop Iran from getting one at any cost. And he actually did tell Maria Bartiromo in a clip that I didn't bother pulling, that at any cost, they're going to have to prevent Iran from getting this nuke. Now, when it comes to the US of A and to Russia and to China, they're all going to denuclearize, but these other countries, we're just going to have to stop them from getting nukes. Now, Donald Trump's foreign policy is not to meddle in the affairs of other countries, but we can't let them get nukes. That is for sure. And just like all the rest of this, there's no way whatsoever that Donald Trump is just communicating these messages based on things that he knows are already going to be inevitable because they're happening on the Great Reset side and on his side, no matter what. And so Donald Trump is grabbing the narratives, making sure that his hands are clean from all the problems. And then, or when it's something good, he reroutes the story so that it is understood to be part of the America First ideology and not part of that global regime agenda, so that we can understand the policies, what actually works, and not get hoodwinked forever again, so that we might actually be able to defend the country now, all of us understanding the global regime agenda, rather than just giving it away in chunks as happened over the course of the last 250 years. And also, speaking of nukes, we're just going to take one more. Oh, man. Let's just do it. We're going to take one more little break for a Rumble commercial. I want to talk about things that people are afraid to say out loud. Who is in control of America's nukes? It's not Biden. Never was. Meanwhile, we have Russian ships off the coast of Florida and full-blown wars in Ukraine and Israel. Well, maybe 6 months ago, or maybe a few years ago, or maybe never, but okay. It would be better if you just said nuclear weapons are big monsters that can blow your heads off for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles, no matter how many heads you have. And even if King Charles has already eaten one of your heads, the nukes will blow the rest of them off. And if they blow your heads off in the direction of King Charles, he might still eat your brains. The world is at its most unstable point since World War II, and with nuclear weapons, the stakes are 10 times higher. That is messed up, man. What we know for sure is that the stakes can never be higher than the Jews. How do people like you and I stay safe? Every prepper needs to have RadioGuard ACE, the only FDA-approved drug to treat radioactive fallout. If you don't want your head blown off for miles and miles and miles in all directions, get RadioGuard ACE. Only the feds had it until now. That's why Rumble partnered with 5G Free, the only company in the world that has a supply of RadioGuard ACE and the ability to prescribe it in prophylactic form so that you do not get your heads blown off for miles and miles and miles. Get their radiation emergency kit with RadioGuard ACE, potassium iodide, Zofran, and a Geiger counter. There's simply no other tool in your arsenal to protect against a radioactive threat. Go to 5gfree.com, code STUDIO. That's the number 5. gfree.com, code STUDIO, to save 15% and get your radiation kit now. And it occurred to me while reading that perhaps King Charles is not a zombie who eats brains and is a Haitian who is eating the dogs and eating the cats and eating the pets of the people that live there. I don't know, but he does have an extremely, extremely messed up grill. Let's just take one more look at this mouth. This disgusting, disgusting picture. What is happening with that guy? Oh, gosh, it's horrifying. Nightmare material, everybody. All right, we are potentially going to set the record for the longest episode ever. I'm just kidding. I don't think we will. I don't think we will. Let's try to go through the rest of this kind of quickly. Man, it's so hard to estimate how much material is necessary for an episode of sufficient length that I cannot feel bad about only doing podcasts 3 days a week rather than 5. This is Breitbart from Saturday. Trump effect. Poland to increase defense spending to 5%. Build a 500,000-man army, says Prime Minister Tusk. Now, what we've heard over the past week or so is that the Europeans are going to build a European army. And there are some people out there suggesting that they need to begin conscripting European men from all across the continent into the army. They just have to start drafting people and forcing them into the army. Now, if you're a European man out there who's worried about that, first of all, obviously speak up. Second of all, understand that any war your country gets into is automatically a disaster for you and for your country and only benefits the global regime. And besides that, understand that if these countries don't have armies, then ultimately they should be more scared of you than you are of them. So if you allow yourself to be conscripted, I think something is probably drastically wrong with you, European man. So this guy, Donald Tusk, is, I guess, putting himself to some extent in line with what Donald Trump has said. If Europe wants to defend itself, then it's going to have to defend itself. The article notes that despite already being one of the top spenders in GDP on NATO defense around 4%, Poland should increase its spending to at least 5% of GDP. And one would hope they would just have their own army. Prime Minister Tusk called for Poland to build an army of at least 500,000 people. I just realized I did not put this link up, if I can speak. 500,000 people, including reservists, up from around 200,000 today. To help accomplish this aim, the Polish leader called for the return of military training for all adult men in the country. Now, that is not something I think that people should be forced into doing, but we'd probably be a much stronger and better country if everybody did it. And I know that I would have probably been better served in my life by having gone and done that rather than spending all that money for one of those elite colleges. Who knows how much of my education I use? And, whatever has happened in your past is what brought you to this moment. And there is no point in regretting these sorts of things. But with the knowledge I have now, would I do it again? I think the answer is a resounding no way in hell. But who's to say how things might have been different? We do what we can. Oh, you know what's funny? I just attempted to pull up a Twitter link, and it turns out that X, formerly Twitter, is still down. So thankfully, I anticipated that possibility and grabbed these pictures. Speaking of Poland, actually, you know what? Let's go through one other thing about Poland. Here's the thing about Poland and Donald Tusk. Donald Tusk is consistently presented to the world as the leader of Poland. He is not the leader of Poland. You can even ask the machine, is Donald Tusk the leader of Poland? And perhaps I will bring up this conversation that I had over the weekend with Perplexity about Donald Tusk. Now, hold on just a moment here. Maybe I brought it up on Chat GPT. Must have been Chat GPT. Pardon, hold for processing for just a moment here. Where is it? Well, we'll leave that aside for now, and I'll just explain. So, Donald Tusk is the head of the false reality layer of the Polish government. You can ask the machine, who is the leader of Poland, and it'll pull up Donald Tusk, because the global media has presented Donald Tusk as the leader of Poland. But he's not the leader of Poland. President Duda is the leader of Poland. And it's funny, Maria Bartiromo also asked Donald Trump about Duda and some comments Duda had made in an interview with Maria Bartiromo. Also worth noting, Donald Trump just appointed Maria Bartiromo to the board of directors of the Kennedy Center. So is there coordination there? It's also worth remembering that Duda came and visited Donald Trump at Trump Tower during that 4-year period where Donald Trump was, quote unquote, not president. So in 1997, during the fall of communism, the rise of democracy, as we are told it, led by the British Commonwealth, the British Empire, the European Union, and NATO, the West, that we are supposed to preserve at all costs. So says Douglas Murray, who also believes we have to protect Ukraine and Israel at all costs, because he's a globalist, and the way they use the West is not the same way we think of our culture being preserved. And I don't mean as whites, I mean as Americans. Although people also will say the same thing, meaning as whites. And truth be told, I don't give a shit. Have your own opinions. I don't care how you think of these things. That's not how I think of them. But if it's how you think of them, do your own thing. If you think that that is the most important thing against this global regime, I think that you are very confused. But I'm not. That's not my fight. So they installed a new form of government in Poland. They created a constitution in Poland, as they do in all the nations they take over. And they say it's modeled on the American Constitution. You might begin to wonder at some point, understanding that our states used to be a disparate collection of these individual kind of nation states that were forming a union, and instead were essentially taken over and by the global banking regime, with their preferred form of government becoming our form of government that now we are told is the greatest government that ever existed. It just so happens that all these other nations that they take over have had the same form of government for the same amount of time. And there were similar revolutions happening across Europe, okay, and have in phases 4 times now. This is the 4th. At least as far as we know, and it could go back further. So they put in this same form of government in Poland, and now they describe the prime minister, the head of that government, as the leader of Poland. Now, when they put that new constitution in place in Poland, they had a referendum. And something around 50% of the population bothered to vote in that referendum. And under 25% total voted for that new constitution. 25% of Poland's population in 1997 voted for that new constitution. Or maybe it was 99. Don't quote me on that. Under 25%, okay, supported the new constitution. That's not legitimacy. By any definition in political philosophy or history, that is not legitimacy. Now, they have changed, of course, the definition of that to make it that there is a stable government and that they provide services to the people. That is the new definition. All it takes for a legitimate government in the eyes of the global regime. But it's not actually the definition of a legitimate government. So the global regime installed an illegitimate government and overthrew Poland's constitution, replacing it with another one. Tusk is the leader of that government. Duda is the president who controls the military and can veto any legislation that goes through the Donald Tusk branch. And when you're talking about who has the real power in the government, who is the real head of government, it's obviously Duda. But it's told to us as though it is Tusk. And so we have the same dynamic again that we have here and in many other countries around the world. There is a false reality layer of government. There is the real layer of government with the power. Very strange. We have someone advertising products in the chat using promo code Badlands. That's not a Badlands product, and it's not anything to do with my show. I love Badlands, obviously, but this is not a Badlands show. This is just my show. So strange. So now let's go to Rubio, speaking of Poland. This is Radoslaw Sikorski. Starlinks for Ukraine are paid for by the Polish Digitization Ministry at the cost of about $50 million per year. The ethics of threatening the victim of aggression apart, if SpaceX proves to be an unreliable provider, we will be forced to look for other suppliers. Marco Rubio responded, saying, just making things up. No one has made any threats about cutting Ukraine off from Starlink. And say thank you, because without Starlink, Ukraine would have lost this war long ago, and Russians would be on the border with Poland right now. And we just need to make sure that we are on the right page with our pleases and our pleases and our thank yous. And the only person who is capable of properly doing that is the unfortunate non-successor, none other than J.D. Vance. There he is right there. It's funny, J.D. Vance might be the first person who ends up no longer having a recognizable face in the world as a result of seizing political power. Donald Trump, the other night, by the way, speaking of multiple faces, released, good Lord, Donald Trump is on the biggest Truth Social spree I've ever seen. He's posted like 50 times in the last hour. More than that, perhaps. apparently he is taking over everyone's Truth Social feed for the next 3 days, or is setting a lot of bait as bot traps. Because if you ever look in Donald Trump's comments on Truth Social, you'll see nothing but bots posting kind of pro-Trump memes, but it basically blocks out all possible conversation from real people. And so it makes it impossible to engage on that platform in any real way. And it's, I think, pretty unfortunate, but maybe they're doing it on purpose. Regardless, here's Trump's Truth Social post from Saturday night. Trump and Elvis in the same picture as though they are the same person. He provided no other context whatsoever. But Elvis is the king and Trump's the king, so hey, who knows? Now, where are we? We are coming right down to the end. Elon Musk also responded to Sikorsky. Sikorsky's initial Twitter post that we just read there in the Rubio post was a response to Elon Musk saying, I literally challenged Putin to one-on-one physical combat over Ukraine, and my Starlink system is the backbone of the Ukrainian army. Their entire front line would collapse if I turned it off. Sikorsky responded to that, and Elon Musk then responded to him, be quiet, small man. You pay a tiny fraction of the cost, and there is no substitute for Starlink. But he said that Ukraine's front line would collapse without Starlink. I believe Mark Kelly was in here protecting Starlink at some point as well. But first, let's go here actually to Fox Business. Musk says Starlink is backbone of the Ukrainian army. Entire front line would collapse if I turned it off. What I am sickened by is years of slaughter in a stalemate that Ukraine will inevitably lose, Musk said. Donald Trump, by the way, said the same thing to Maria Bartiromo. There's just no chance Ukraine is winning. And anyone who believes otherwise is nuts. Ukraine should be seen as a proxy of the global regime. And the people of Ukraine, Elon Musk has potentially kept their internet active. But in terms of the Ukrainian army, unless it is only fighting elements of the global regime, all of this is nonsense. They are also supposedly surrounded in Kursk, that part of Russia that they totally took over like 6 months ago or whatever. Musk said, in addition, place sanctions on the top 10 Ukrainian oligarchs, especially the ones with mansions in Monaco, and this will stop immediately. That is the key to the puzzle. I guess we should find out who has mansions in Monaco. But they are very, very angry at Elon Musk for noting, not threatening to take the Starlinks away, but noting that they would be taken away. Or that, sorry, if they were taken away, then Ukraine would collapse. Elon also said that Starlink will never turn off its terminals in Ukraine. He said, to be extremely clear, no matter how much I disagree with the Ukraine policy, Starlink will never turn off its terminals. I am simply stating that. Without Starlink, the Ukrainian lines would collapse, as the Russians can jam all other communications. We would never do such a thing or use it as a bargaining chip. Never turn off Starlink. Well, also, so the key there is that Starlink can't be turned off externally, that they're not able to do that. And he is never going to do it, whether or not he agrees with the policy. So we are seeing examples here of a stable, parallel information infrastructure, which is something we've been talking about on this podcast for years now. And the TV has still talked about it a total of 0 times. And Elon Musk himself is not even going so far as to say that himself yet. although I have no doubt that we will get there. Senator Mark Kelly pretends that he was just in the middle of a war zone here. He's right next to a tank. And, of course, he's like an astronaut or something. So, he's a very tough guy. Just left Ukraine, he says. What I saw proved to me that we can't give up on the Ukrainian people. Everyone wants this war to end, but any agreement has to protect Ukraine's security and can't be a giveaway to Putin. Let me tell you about my trip and why it's important we stand with Ukraine. And we're not going to go through the whole thread. Elon Musk responded to him, "You are a traitor." And of course, he is. He's a servant of the global regime. He is a servant of the foreign occupation in this country. Let's go to Steve Witkoff talking about Ukraine.
For that whole incident that happened in the Oval Office, I think that was an important step. And there's been a lot of discussion between our teams and the Ukrainians and the Europeans who are relevant to this discussion as well. And I would like to describe it as progress. And so I would hope that there's a deal. What's on the table, what's important to discuss are obviously security protocols for the Ukrainians. They care about that. The territorial issues, the utility plant. But these are not complicated things. They just need to be put on the table, and everybody needs to be transparent about what their expectations are. Then we can begin to have a discussion around how we compromise.
Well, now your plane leaves in 48 minutes, and I would ask you this. What is your best tip for dealing with the jet lag that you surely must have to deal with?
I think you just, Dana, I think you submit to it, you get used to it, and you follow the lead of our boss, Donald J. Trump, and you just keep on going, because that's what he does, and that's what, just get on with it. That's exactly correct.
Good luck. We're hoping for success.
That's what you got to do. Just got to keep on going. Okay, let's move from Ukraine. We're going to hit a couple more European stories real quick, and then we'll be out of here. I see people in the chat saying this is definitely going to be my longest stream. I don't think that's necessarily true. We have maybe 10 minutes left. If I can get it in under that 10 minutes, not the longest one. This is the Associated Press today. Just going to hit this quickly. Chaos in Romania's capital after far-right Călin Georgescu barred from presidential redo. Chaos broke out in Romania's capital Sunday evening as incensed supporters of the far-right populist Călin Georgescu protested the electoral body's decision to reject his candidacy in a presidential election redo. He won the first round of last year's race before a top court annulled the election. So he won, and then they just canceled it. The 62-year-old Georgescu, filed his candidacy on Friday in the capital, Bucharest. The Central Election Bureau, also known by its Romanian acronym BEC, had 48 hours to register or reject it. In its decision, BEC cited the country's constitutional court ruling last year to cancel the election, arguing it was ordered due to, quote, the candidate's failure to comply with electoral regulations, end quote. It would be unacceptable, they said, for the restarted election process to consider the same individual as being eligible for the presidency. And Georgescu, the crowd was chanting, the last resort is another revolution. Georgescu then said, he called the decision a direct blow to the heart of democracy worldwide and said, I have one message left. If democracy in Romania falls, the entire democratic world will fall. This is just the beginning. It's that simple. Europe is now a dictatorship. Romania is under tyranny. And we shall see on that. I would urge caution on all of these because the way these European leaders are identified to us is not always the way that they are in reality. I find Giorgia Meloni in Italy to be somewhat questionable. And this woman, Alice Weidel, Vidal, I don't know how to say her name, who was extensively promoted online, particularly on Twitter, and often by Elon Musk, the blonde lady from the Alternative for Deutschland. She also happens to be apparently before I say this, let me just check with the machine. I saw a post about it yesterday, but I was on the move and didn't go deeply into it. Is Alice, hold for processing. Wouldn't want to say this without knowing it's true. Okay. So she's not married, but she does have a Sri Lankan female partner. They have been together since 2009 and adopted 2 sons. So that's how much of a Nazi she is. Now, again, I've been lied to a whole lot about Nazis. I believe that they're just, they were business partners of the Zionists in the building of the global regime proxy state in Israel. And they might as well just be the controlled opposition at that point. So is Alice Weidel a representative of the controlled opposition in Germany? Quite possibly. I don't know. I just stay open-minded to these things. And ultimately, it's not really our business to root for winners and losers in the politics of other countries, because right now, all the people rooting for the winners of these political races in other countries, like the people who were pulling for Weidel, are the same people who would be pulling and are pulling for Pierre Poilievre in Canada. So I trust zero of those people. They don't really have interesting or informed views of geopolitics. They post ridiculous and always wrong things all the time. And a great example would be their reaction to the elections in Venezuela last year. I would keep an arm's length from all of these issues, and maybe particularly this one, as it becomes a prominent story right now. This is CNN from yesterday. Syrian government loyalists accused of executing civilians as violence erupts. We're being told there is mass violence against Christians, the Alawite minority in Syria. Jack Posobiec has been calling it blood chaos over and over and over and over and over again for the last few days, which makes it sound like an extreme op. He keeps repeating that Tulsi Gabbard called this years and years and years ago, and perhaps that's true, and perhaps that's because it was already happening. And are we seeing things that have already happened, as we do so often in these other countries? Now, down here in this article from CNN, a battle for purification. This is the segment. Again, I'm not trying to deny that any of these things ever happened, and not necessarily denying that they are happening now, but we can also take a pause and think about whether or not this thing that has been happening since 2011 is just starting to happen now because the country was overthrown by a former al-Qaeda-linked terrorist who we're now told is the legitimate leader of the country, al-Jilani, who is now al-Sharaa, the woke terrorist you might remember from a few months ago. So several videos appeared on social media, they're saying. And then they say it's unclear when exactly the video was filmed. They're talking about different videos here. In what sounded like an Egyptian accent, in one of the videos filmed at night. CNN has not been able to geolocate the video. Then they had videos geolocated, showed dozens of bodies, they said. And then another, it was unclear where or when the shooting took place. So they have videos of this on the internet that describes the situation that we're told is unfolding there. And I love how much Poso triggers people. He's just delivering narratives, okay? All we have to do is focus on what narratives he's delivering and what the purpose of delivering those narratives is. Also, I'm not exactly sure why someone is upset by Donald Tusk, but we will continue on. We are coming right down to the end here. And in thinking about the informational time machine, and the potential for these things to be rearranged on timelines and thus outside of our understanding on a contemporary basis. Here is Donald Trump from 2015.
Assad, and I've watched a little bit on the other side. The problem is the other side of Assad, we have no idea who they are. They probably are ISIS. I'm saying, are we better off with Assad? We have no idea who these people are. We give them weapons, we give them ammunition, we give them everything. Aaron, we have no idea who. I mean, maybe it's worse than Assad. So what are we doing? Why are we involved? We have to get rid of ISIS, very importantly. But I look at Assad, and Assad, to me, looks better than the other side. And, you know, this has happened before. We back a certain side, and that side turns out to be a total catastrophe. Russia likes Assad seemingly a lot. Let them worry about ISIS. Let them fight it out.
How about that? Donald Trump nailing it. That was 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago. I assume that's probably after he started campaigning. So nearly 10 years ago, Trump is talking about what's happening now. And if you ask the machine, here's the Syrian civil war, significant impact on the Alawite community, verbal threats, physical attacks, executions. In September, al-Nusra Front fighters reportedly executed at least 16 Alawite civilians, targeted violence, indiscriminate attacks on Alawite villages in Syria, high casualty rates. By 2015, up to a third of the 250,000 Alawite male fighters of the Assad regime had been killed. Some reports estimate that around 100,000 Alawite youths were killed in combat. Forced conscription, of course, by the Assad regime. And we were told Assad was removed. It also seems to be the case that Assad is coming back. And if and when Assad comes back in the very near future, should we then believe that Assad actually left, or that we just got told a whole bunch of bullshit so that the world at large could understand these things that have happened by living through them and being told about them as though they are real events in the world right now? And I would suggest that it is the latter. Looking at the chat, I believe we are done on Rumble Rants. And unfortunately, no one else has Candymanned us. So I might just have to do it myself. Anna Paulina Luna.
Panoonah Banka.
All right. So Wednesday for the subscriber stream, we'll be back at 6 p.m. Eastern, okay? And as I said before, it's going to stream on the Substack platform, imyourmoderator.substack.com, to paid subscribers live, okay? So if you're a paid subscriber there and you don't want to be part of Rumble Premium, just watch on Substack, open up a web page, you'll see it right there, or the Substack app on your phone if you're watching on a mobile device or whatever, okay? So that's part one. Then it's going to stream to Rumble Premium subscribers on the Rumble platform, and it will be unlisted, okay? So you're going to have the Rumble link in the Substack post like always, but only premium subscribers will be able to watch on Rumble. Otherwise, paid subscribers on Substack, just watch on Substack if you don't want to be part of Rumble Premium, okay? I hope that makes sense. We're going to give it a try this way. I think that this is the best way to cover all my bases. I'm always open to your feedback. Let me just say one other thing that I also went over at GART this weekend. People have been responding really well to the short video clips that I make after the show is over, okay? If you like that and you see things from the episode that you want to be able to share, just grab a timestamp and hit me with a timestamp. If you want to screen record the thing on your phone, you can do that too, though you don't have to. Timestamp is enough because that helps me remember, oh, hey, that segment was good. People might like that. That's something that's going to be worth my time to clip quickly and then put out there so that all of you can actually go and share it. So I'm more than happy to do that side of it. It's just you make my life so much easier by hitting me with a timestamp. Hey, record this thing from 1 hour and 10 minutes to 1 hour and 13 minutes. That would be awesome. You had a great segment there. Okay. Hit me on Truth Social. Hit me on Telegram. Hit me in the comments on Rumble or on YouTube or whatever. All right. That is a very easy way to help me help you become a force multiplier and get those things out there. All right. And so with that, I will be back on Wednesday for the subscriber stream, Thursday or Friday, hopefully, but not necessarily. Same reasonable time, same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes! I can't stand to see him in all this pain! You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you! Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in! For the love of God, let the boy move in with you! Good Lord!
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.